Teaching on telepathy. The field of telepathic interplay. One of the characteristics, distinguishing the group of world servers and knowers, is that the outer organization which holds them integrated is practically non-existent. They are held together by an inner structure of thought and by a telepathic medium of interrelation. The great ones, whom we all seek to serve, are thus linked, and can, at the slightest need and with the least expenditure of force, get en rapport with each other. They are all tuned to a particular vibration. In the new groups are collected together people who are very diverse in their nature, who are found upon differing rays, who are of different nationalities, and who are each of them the product of widely varying environments and heredity. Besides these obvious factors which immediately attract attention, there is also to be found an equal diversity in the life experience of the souls concerned. The complexity of the problem is also tremendously increased when one remembers the long road which each has traveled and the many factors, emerging out of a dim and distant past, which have contributed to make each person what he now is. When, therefore, one dwells on the barriers and difficulties supervening upon such diverse conditions, the question arises at once: what provides the common meeting ground, and what makes it possible to have an interplay between the minds involved? The answer to this question is of paramount importance and necessitates a dear understanding. 2. When the biblical words are used, "In him we live and move and have our being," we have the statement of a fundamental law in nature and the enunciated basis of the fact which we cover by the rather meaningless word, omnipresence. Omnipresence has its basis in the substance of the universe, and in what the scientists call the ether. This word, ether, is a generic term covering the ocean of energies which are all interrelated and which constitute that one synthetic energy body of our planet. In approaching, therefore, the subject of telepathy, it must be carefully borne in mind that the etheric body of every form in nature is an integral part of the substantial form of God Himself, not the dense physical form, but what the esotericists regard as the form-making substance. We use the word God to signify the expression of the one life which animates every form on the outer objective plane. The etheric or energy body, therefore, of every human being is an integral part of the etheric body of the planet itself and consequently of the solar system. Through this medium, every human being is basically related to every other expression of the divine life, minute or great. The function of the etheric body is to receive energy impulses and to be swept into activity by these impulses, or streams of force, emanating from some originating source or other. The etheric body is in reality naught but energy. It is composed of myriads of threads of force or tiny streams of energy, held in relation to the emotional and mental bodies and to the soul by their coordination effect. These streams of energy, in their turn, have an effect on the physical body and swing it into activity of some kind or another, according to the nature and power of whatever type of energy may be dominating the etheric body at any particular time. 3. Through the etheric body, therefore, circulates energy emanating from some mind. With humanity in the mass, response is made unconsciously to the rulings of the universal mind. This is complicated in our time and age by a growing responsiveness to the mass ideas, called sometimes public opinion, of the rapidly evolving human mentality. Within the human family are also found those who respond to that inner group of thinkers who, working in mental matter, control from the subjective side of life the emergence of the great plan and the manifestation of divine purpose. This group of thinkers falls into 7 main divisions and is presided over by 3 great lives or superconscious entities. These 3 are the Manu, the Christ, and the Mahachohan. These 3 work primarily through the method of influencing the minds of the adepts and the initiates. These latter in their turn influence the disciples of the world, and these disciples, each in his own place and on his own responsibility, work out their concept of the plan and seek to give expression to it as far as possible. It is, therefore, as you can surmise, a process of stepping down rates of vibration until they are sufficiently heavy to affect physical plane matter and thus make possible the building of organized effects on the physical plane. These disciples have hitherto worked very much alone except when karmic relationships have revealed them to each other, and telepathic intercommunication has been fundamentally confined to the hierarchy of adepts and initiates, both in and out of incarnation, and to their individual work with their disciples. It is, however, now deemed possible to establish a resembling condition and a telepathic relation between disciples on the physical plane. No matter where they may find themselves, this group of mystics and knowers will, eventually find it feasible to communicate with one another, and frequently do even now. A basic mystical idea or some new revelation of truth is suddenly recognized by many and finds expression simultaneously through the medium of many minds. No one person can claim individual right to the enunciated principle or truth. Several minds have registered it. It is usually stated, however, in a wide generalization, that these people have tapped the inner thought currents or have responded to the play of the universal mind. Literally and technically this is not so. The universal mind is tapped by some member of the planetary hierarchy according to his mental bias and equipment, and the immediate needs sensed by the working adepts. He then presents the new idea, new discovery, or the new revelation to the group of adepts, telepathically, of course, my brother, and, when it has been discussed by them, he later presents it to his group of disciples. Among them he will find one who responds more readily and intelligently than the others, and this one, through his clear thinking and the power of his formulated thought forms, can then influence other minds. These others grasp the concept as theirs. They seize upon it and work it out into manifestation. Each regards it as his special privilege so to do, and, because of this specializing faculty and his automatically engendered responsibility, he throws back of it all the energy which is his, and works and fights for his thought forms. An illustration of this is to be found in the history of the League of Nations. Before he took up special work, the Master Serapis sought to bring through some constructive idea for the helping of humanity. He conceived of a world unity in the realm of politics which would work out as an intelligent banding of the nations for the preservation of international peace. He presented it to the adepts in conclave and it was felt that something could be done. 5. The Master Jesus undertook to present it to his group of disciples as he was working in the Occident. One of these disciples on the inner planes seized upon the suggestion and passed it on, or rather stepped it down, until it registered in the brain of Colonel House. He, not recording the source, of which he was totally unaware, passed it on in turn to that sixth-ray aspirant, called Woodrow Wilson. Then, fed by the wealth of analogous ideas in the minds of many, it was presented to the world. It should be borne in mind that the function of a disciple is to focus a stream of energy of some special kind upon the physical plane where it can become an attractive center of force and draw to itself similar types of ideas and thought currents which are not strong enough to live by themselves or to make a sufficiently strong impact upon the human consciousness. In union is strength. This is the second law governing telepathic communication. The first law is the power to communicate is to be found in the very nature of substance itself. It lies potentially within the ether, and the significance of telepathy is to be found in the word omnipresence. The second law is the interplay of many minds produces a unity of thought which is powerful enough to be recognized by the brain. Here we have a law governing a subjective activity and another law governing objective manifestation. Let us voice these laws in the simplest manner possible. When 6. Each member of the group can function in his mind consciousness, untrammeled by the brain or the emotional nature, he will discover the universality of the mental principle which is the first exoteric expression of the soul consciousness. He will then enter into the world of ideas, becoming aware of them through the sensitive receiving plate of the mind. He then seeks to find those who respond to the same type of ideas and who react to the same mental impulse, simultaneously with himself. Uniting himself to them, he discovers himself to be en rapport with them. The understanding of the first law produces results in the mind or mental body. The understanding of the second law produces results in a lesser receiving station, the brain. This is possible through the strengthening of a man's own mental reaction by the mental reaction of others, similarly receptive. It will be found therefore that this process of communication, governed by these two laws, has always been in operation among the adepts, the initiates and the senior disciples who are in physical plane bodies. Now the operation of this process is to be extended and steadily developed by the emerging group of mystics and world servers who constitute, in embryo, the world savior. Only those who know something of the meaning of concentration and meditation and who can hold the mind steady in the light will be able to understand the first law and comprehend that interplay of thought-directed energies which finds one terminal of expression in the mind of some inspired thinker, and the other terminal in the mind of the attentive world server who seeks to tune in on those mind processes which hold the clue to ultimate world salvation. The thought-directing energy has for its source a thinker who can enter into the divine mind, owing to his having transcended human limitation. The thought-directed receiver, 7, is the man, in exoteric expression, who has aligned his brain, his mind, and his soul. It is a fact that omnipresence, which is a law in nature and based on the fact that the etheric bodies of all forms constitute the world etheric body, makes omniscience possible. The etheric body of the planetary logos is swept into activity by his directed will. Energy is the result of his thought form, playing in and through his energy body. This thought form embodies and expresses his world purpose. All the subhuman forms of life and the human forms up to the stage of advanced man are governed by divine thought through the medium of their energy bodies, which are an integral part of the whole. They react, however, unconsciously and unintelligently. Advanced humanity, the mystics and the knowers, are becoming increasingly aware of the mind which directs the evolutionary process. When this awareness is cultivated and the individual mind is brought consciously into contact with the mind of God as it expresses itself through the illumined mind of the hierarchy of adepts, we shall have the steady growth of omniscience. This is the whole story of telepathic interplay in the true sense. It portrays the growth of that oligarchy of elect souls who will eventually rule the world, who will be chosen so to rule, and who will be recognized by the mass as eligible for that high office through the coordination that they have established between 1. The universal mind. 2. Their individual mind illumined by the soul consciousness. 3. The brain, reacting to the individual mind, and 4. The group of those whose minds and brains are similarly tuned and telepathically related. In connection with disciples and aspirants to discipleship, it is presumed that their minds are somewhat attuned to the soul, that they are also so aligned that the soul, mind and brain are coordinated and are beginning to function as a unit. This is the individual responsibility. Now comes the task of learning to be responsive to the group and to find and contact those minds which are energized by similar thought currents. This has to be cultivated. How, my brother, shall this be done? Let us consider the various types of telepathic work. The undeveloped human being and the unthinking, non-mental man or woman can be and often are telepathic, but the center through which they work is the solar plexus. The line of communication is, therefore, from solar plexus to solar plexus. This is therefore instinctual telepathy and concerns feeling in every case. It involves, invariably, radiations from the solar plexus, which in the case of the animal world serves usually as the instinctual brain. This type of telepathic communication is definitely a characteristic of the animal body of man, and one of the best illustrations of this telepathic rapport is that existing between a mother and her child. It is this type of telepathy which is predominantly present in the average spiritualistic séance. There the medium, quite unconsciously, sets up a telepathic rapport with the people in the circle. Their feelings, worries, sorrows, and desires become apparent and form part of the reading, so-called. Both the sitters and the medium are functioning through the same center. With this class of medium, and in this type of séance, the highly intelligent and mentally polarized man or woman will learn nothing, and will probably receive no messages, unless faked. Hence, therefore, when it comes to scientific investigation by trained minds, physical phenomena has predominated and not the more subtle forms of psychism. Where, 9. The more subtle forms of super or extrasensory perception have been involved, the subjects have been either adolescent or in their early 20s and have been primarily and rightly focused in the emotional feeling body. This is true even when they are highly intellectual. This form of telepathic communication is therefore of two kinds, with the solar plexus always involved. 1. It will be from solar plexus to solar plexus between two people who are ordinary, emotional, governed by desire, and primarily centered in the astral and animal bodies. 2. It will be between such a solar plexus person, if I may so call him, and a higher type whose solar plexus center is functioning actively but whose throat center is also alive. This type of person registers in two places, provided that the thought sensed and sent out by the solar plexus person has in it something of mental substance or energy. Pure feeling and entirely emotional emanations between people necessitate only solar plexus contact. Later, when group work in telepathy is undertaken, the centers of transmission wherein high and consecrated feeling, devotion, aspiration and love are concerned and where the groups work with pure love, communication will be from heart to heart, and from a group heart to another group heart. The phrase, heart-to-heart talk, so often used, is usually a misnomer at this time, but will someday be true. At present it is usually a solar plexus conversation. The second form of telepathic work is that of mind-to-mind, and it is with this form of communication that the highest investigation is at this time concerned. Only mental types are involved, and the more that emotion and feeling, and strong desire can be eliminated, the more accurate will be the work accomplished. The strong desire to achieve success in telepathic work, and the fear of failure, are the surest ways to offset fruitful effort. In all such work as this, an attitude of non-attachment and a spirit of don't care are of real assistance. Experimenters along this line need to give more time and thought to the recognition of types of force. They need to realize that emotion, and desire for anything, on the part of the receiving agent creates streams of emanating energy which rebuff or repulse that which seeks to make contact, such as the directed thought of someone seeking rapport. When these streams are adequately strong, they act like a boomerang and return to the emanating center, being attracted back there by the power of the vibration which sent them forth. In this thought lies hid the cause of a. The failure on the part of the broadcasting or transmitting agent. Intense desire to make a satisfactory impression will attract the outgoing thought back again to the transmitter. b. The failure on the part of the receiving agent whose own intense desire to be successful sends out such a stream of outgoing energy that the stream of incoming energy is met, blocked and driven back whence it came. Or, if the receiver is aware of this and seeks to stem the tide of his desire, he frequently succeeds in surrounding himself with a wall of inhibited desire through which naught can penetrate. 2. Telepathic work. Telepathy and the allied powers will only be understood when the nature of force, of emanations and radiations, and of energy currents, is better grasped. This is rapidly coming about as science penetrates more deeply into the arcana of energies and begins to work, as does the occultist, in the world of forces. It should also be borne in mind that it is only as the centers employed are consciously used that we have that carefully directed work which will be fruitful of results. For instance, an emotional person, using primarily the solar plexus center, will be endeavoring to enter into rapport with a mental type. From this will result only confusion. The two parties concerned are using different centers and are sensitive to certain types of force and closed to others. Again, some people, even if mentally polarized and therefore sensitive to similar vibrations, attempt to make a telepathic contact when one party is under emotional strain and therefore not responsive, or one party is intensively occupied with some mental problem and is encased in a wall of thought forms and therefore impervious to impressions. You can see, therefore, how a cultivation of detachment is a necessary qualification for success in telepathic work. All who seek to tread the path of discipleship are endeavoring to live in the head center, and, through meditation, to bring in the power of the soul. The problem which you face, as disciples learning telepathic sensitivity, is founded on two things: a. Upon which of your three bodies is the most active, thereby is indicated where you live subjectively most of the time. 12. b. Upon which center is the most expressive in your equipment, and through which you contact most easily modern living conditions. I mean by these words, where, literally speaking, your life energy is predominantly focused and your sentient energy expresses itself the most. An understanding of this will make you better able to work and to make intelligent experiment. Therefore, watch yourselves with care yet impersonally, and work out the why and the wherefore of the effects produced, for by this means you will learn. The third type of telepathic work is that from soul to soul. This is the highest type of telepathic work possible to humanity and is that form of communication which has been responsible for all the inspirational writings of real power, the world scriptures, the illumined utterances, the inspired speakers, and the language of symbolism. It only becomes possible where there is an integrated personality, and, at the same time, the power to focus oneself in the soul consciousness. The mind and the brain have, at the same time, to be brought into perfect rapport and alignment. It is my intention to elucidate further this science of communication, which started through the sense of touch and developed through sound, symbols, words and sentences, languages, writing, art, and on again to the stage of higher symbols, vibratory contact, telepathy, inspiration and illumination. I have, however, in the above, dealt with the general outline and we will take the specific details later. The work of the telepathic communicators is one of the most important in the coming new age, and it will be of value to gain some idea of its significance and techniques. 13. I would, in summarizing the above instruction, state that in connection with individuals. 1. Telepathic communication is a. Between soul and mind. b. Between soul, mind and brain. This is as far as interior individual development is concerned. 2. When it is found between individuals, telepathic communication is a. Between soul and soul. b. Between mind and mind. c. Between solar plexus and solar plexus, and therefore purely emotional. d. Between all these three aspects of energy simultaneously, in the case of very advanced people. 3. Telepathic communication is also a. Between a master and his disciples or disciple. b. Between a master and his group and a group or groups of sensitives and aspirants on the physical plane. c. Between subjective and objective groups. d. Between the occult hierarchy and groups of disciples on the physical plane. e. Between the hierarchy and the new group of world servers in order to reach humanity and lift it nearer the goal. This concerns the new science of group telepathic communication, of which herd or mass telepathy, so well known, is the lowest known expression. This instinctual telepathy which is shown by a flight of birds, acting as a unit, or that animal telepathy which serves to govern so mysteriously the movements of herds of animals, and the rapid transmission, 14, of information among the savage races and non-intelligent peoples. These are all instances of that lower externalization of an inner spiritual reality. An intermediate stage of this instinctual activity, based largely on solar plexus reactions, can be seen in modern mass psychology and public opinion. It is, as you know, predominantly emotional, unintelligent, astral and fluidic in its expression. This is changing rapidly and shifting into the realm of what is called intelligent public opinion, but this is, as yet, slow. It involves the activity of the throat and ajna centers. We have, therefore, 1. Instinctual telepathy. 2. Mental telepathy. 3. Intuitional telepathy. I would remind you right at the outset that sensitivity to the thoughts of one's master, sensitivity to the world of ideas, and sensitivity to intuitional impressions are all forms of telepathic sensitivity. In any consideration of this theme, it is obvious that there are three major factors which must be considered. 1. The initiating agent. I use this word with deliberate intent, as the power to work telepathically, both as initiating agent and as recipient, is closely connected with initiation, and is one of the indications that a man is ready for that process. 2. The recipient of that which is conveyed to him on the wings of thought. 3. The medium through which it is intended to convey the transfer of thought, of idea, of wish, of imprint, and therefore of some form of knowledge. 15. This is the simplest statement of the elementary mechanics of the process. This indicates, likewise, the most elementary comprehension of the thought covered so frequently by the Bhagavad Gita in the words which we have translated in the West by the terms the knower, the field of knowledge, and the known. You have oft been told that every sacred book, such as the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, has various interpretations, dependent upon the point in evolution of the reader, or seeker after truth. This interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita in terms of communicator, communication and communicant still demands elucidation, and in the idea which I have above conveyed to you, I have given you a hint. 16. 3. Three types of telepathy. Let us now discuss in some detail the three types of telepathy enumerated above: instinctual telepathy, mental telepathy, and intuitional telepathy. These three produce differing modes of activity and to use a familiar word, differing areas of communication. 1. Instinctual telepathy is based upon those impacts of energy which come from one etheric body and make an impression upon another. The medium of communication employed is, as we have seen, the etheric substance of all bodies, which is necessarily one with the etheric substance of the planet. The area around the solar plexus, though not in direct relation to that center as it exists as an instrument differentiated from all other instruments or centers, is sensitive to the impact of etheric energy, for this area in the etheric body is in direct touch with the astral body, the feeling body. Also, close to the solar plexus is found that center near the spleen, which is the direct instrument for the entrance of prana into the human mechanism. This instinctual response to etheric contact was the mode of communication in Lemurian times, and largely took the place of thought and of speech. It concerned itself primarily with two types of impression: that which had to do with the instinct of self-preservation, and that which had to do with self-reproduction. A higher form of this instinctual telepathy has been preserved for us in the expression we so frequently use, "I have a feeling that," and allied phrases. These are more definitely astral in their implications and work through the astral substance, using the solar plexus area as a sensitive plate for impact and impression. 17. One point should here be made clear, and upon it you should ponder. This astral, not etheric, sensitivity, or feeling telepathy, is basically the Atlantean mode of communication, and involved finally the use of the solar plexus center itself as the receiving agent. The emitting agent, if I may use such a phrase, worked, however, through the entire area of the diaphragm. It was as though there appeared, through emergence, a gathering of forces or outgoing waves of energy in that part of the human vehicle. The relatively wide area from which the information was sent out acted as a large general distributor. The area which received the impression, however, was more localized, involving only the solar plexus. The reason for this can be found in the fact that in Atlantean days the human being was still unable to think, as we understand thinking. The whole lower part of the body, in a sense difficult for us to grasp, was given up to feeling. The communicator's one thought contribution was the name of the recipient, plus the name or noun form of that which was the idea to be conveyed. This embryo thought winged its way to its goal, and the powerful feeling apparatus of the solar plexus received it, acting like a magnet, and drew the feeling impression powerfully there, drawing thus upon the communicator. It is this process which is pursued when, for instance, some mother feels that some danger threatens her child, or that some happening is taking place in connection with her child. She is thus sometimes enabled to send, by the medium of instinctual love, a most definite warning. The solar plexus is involved where the recipient is concerned. The area around the diaphragm is involved where the communicator is concerned. 2. In our race, the Aryan, instinctual telepathic work is still the major expression of this spiritual possibility, but at the same time mental telepathy is becoming increasingly, 18, prevalent. This will be more and more so, as time goes on. It is most difficult in this transition period to define, or differentiate, the peculiar areas involved, because the solar plexus is still exceedingly active. What we have today is a mixture of instinctual telepathy and the beginning of mental telepathy. This manifests, however, very seldom, and then only in the educated classes. With the masses, instinctual telepathy is still the mode of contact. The throat center is primarily involved where mental telepathy is concerned. There is also sometimes a little heart activity and always a measure of solar plexus reaction. Hence our problem. Frequently the communicator will send a message via the throat center, and the recipient will still use the solar plexus. This is the most frequent method, and I would ask you to remember this. The sending out of a message may involve, and frequently does in connection with disciples, the throat center, but the recipient will probably use the solar plexus center. The throat center is the center, par excellence, or the medium, of all creative work. The heart and the throat, however, must eventually be used in synthesis. I stated the reason for this earlier in the words. Only from the heart center can stream, in reality, those lines of energy which link and bind together. It was for this reason that I have assigned certain meditations which stimulated the heart center into action, linking the heart center, between the shoulder blades, to the head center, through the medium of the higher correspondence to the heart center, found within the head center, the thousand-petaled lotus. This heart center, when adequately radiatory and magnetic, relates disciples to each other and to all the world. It will also produce that telepathic interplay which is so much to be desired and which is so constructively useful to the spiritual hierarchy, provided it is established within a group of pledged, 19 disciples, dedicated to the service of humanity. They can then be trusted. Discipleship in the New Age page 87. 3. Intuitional telepathy is one of the developments upon the path of discipleship. It is one of the fruits of true meditation. The area involved is the head and throat, and the three centers which will be rendered active in the process are the head center, which is receptive to impression from higher sources, and the ajna center which is the recipient of the idealistic intuitional impressions. This ajna center can then broadcast that which is received and recognized, using the throat center as the creative formulator of thought, and the factor which embodies the sensed or intuited idea. It will be apparent to you, therefore, how necessary it is to have a better recognition of the activity of the centers, as they are detailed in the Hindu philosophy, and until there is some real understanding of the part the vital body plays as the broadcaster and as the recipient of feelings, thoughts and ideas, there will be little progress made in the right understanding of modes of communication. There is an interesting parallel between the three modes of telepathic work and their three techniques of accomplishment, and the three major ways of communicating on Earth. Instinctual telepathy, train travel, stations everywhere, telegraph. Mental telepathy, ocean travel, ports on the periphery of all lands. Telephone. Intuitional telepathy, air travel, landing place. Radio. That which is going on in connection with the human consciousness is ever externalized or finds its analogy upon the physical plane, and so it is in connection with developed sensitivity to impression. There is still another way in which we can look at the entire subject of response between broadcasting areas of 20 consciousness and the receiving areas of consciousness. We might list the divisions of this process. Much must remain theoretical, and little can, as yet, be worked out in practice. However, let me list the various forms of telepathic work for your general instruction. 1. Telepathic work from solar plexus to solar plexus. With this we have already dealt. This is closely connected with feeling, and little or no thought is involved. It concerns emotions, fear, hate, disgust, love, desire and many other purely astral reactions. It is carried on instinctively and below the diaphragm. 2. Telepathic work from mind to mind. This is beginning to be possible, and many more people are capable of this kind of communication than is now realized. People today do not know whence various mental impressions come, and this greatly enhances the complexity of life at this time and increases the mental problem of thousands. 3. Telepathic work from heart to heart. This type of impression is the sublimation of the feeling response registered earlier upon the ladder of evolution in the solar plexus. It concerns only group impressions, and is the basis of the conditions spoken of in the Bible in connection with the greatest sensitive humanity has ever produced, the Christ. There he is referred to as a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, but in this condition no personal sorrow or grief is involved. It is simply the consciousness of the sorrow of the world and the weight of grief under which humanity struggles. The fellowship of Christ's suffering is the reaction of the disciple to the same world condition. This is the true broken heart, and is as yet a very rare thing to find. The usual broken heart is literally a disrupted solar plexus center, bringing complete demolition of what is occultly called the center of feeling, and consequently the wrecking of the nervous system. It is 21. Really brought about by a failure to handle conditions as a soul. 4. Telepathic work from soul to soul. This is, for humanity, the highest possible type of work. When a man can begin, as a soul, to respond to other souls and their impacts and impressions, then he is rapidly becoming ready for the processes which lead to initiation. There are two other groups of telepathic possibilities which I would like to list for you. They are possibilities only when the four above-mentioned groups of telepathic impression are beginning to form a conscious part of the disciple's experience. 5. Telepathic work between soul and mind. This is the technique whereby the mind is held steady in the light, and then becomes aware of the content of the soul's consciousness, an innate content, or that which is part of the group life of the soul on its own level, and when in telepathic communication with other souls, as mentioned under our fourth heading. This is the true meaning of intuitional telepathy. Through this means of communication the mind of the disciple is fertilized with the new and spiritual ideas. He becomes aware of the great plan. His intuition is awakened. One point should here be borne in mind, which is oft forgotten. The inflow of the new ideas from the Buddhic levels, thus awakening the intuitional aspect of the disciple, indicates that his soul is beginning to integrate consciously and definitely with the spiritual triad, and therefore to identify itself less and less with the lower reflection, the personality. This mental sensitivity and rapport between soul and mind remain for a long time relatively inchoate on the mental plane. That which is sensed remains too vague or too abstract for formulation. It is the stage of the mystical vision and of mystical unfoldment. 6. Telepathic work between soul, mind and brain. In 22, this stage the mind still remains the recipient of impression from the soul but, in its turn, it becomes a transmitting agent, or communicator. The impressions received from the soul, and the intuitions registered as coming from the spiritual triad, via the soul, are now formulated into thoughts. The vague ideas and the vision hitherto unexpressed can now be clothed in form and sent out as embodied thought forms to the brain of the disciple. In time, and as the result of technical training, the disciple can in this way reach the mind and brains of other disciples. This is an exceedingly interesting stage. It constitutes one of the major rewards of right meditation and involves much true responsibility. You will find more anent this stage of telepathy in my other books, particularly a treatise on white magic. Pages 176 to 180, 415, 427 to 428, 477 to 478. This much that I have outlined here is practically all that concerns man in his own inner individual contacts and work and training. There is, however, a whole range of telepathic contacts which should be noted because they constitute the goal for humanity. 7. Telepathic work between a master, the focal point of a group, and the disciple in the world. It is an occult truth that no man is really admitted into a master's group, as an accepted disciple, until he has become spiritually impressionable and can function as a mind in collaboration with his own soul. Prior to that he cannot be a conscious part of a functioning group on the inner planes gathered around a personalized force, the master. He cannot work in true rapport with his fellow disciples. But when he can work somewhat as a conscious soul, then the master can begin to impress him with group ideas via his own soul. He hovers then for quite a while upon the periphery of the group. Eventually, as his spiritual sensitivity increases, he 23 can be definitely impressed by the master and taught the technique of contact. Later, the group of disciples, functioning as one synthetic thought form, can reach him and thus automatically he becomes one of them. To those who have the true esoteric sense, the above paragraph will convey a good deal of information, hitherto hidden. 8. Telepathic work between a master and his group. This is the mode of work whereby a master trains and works through his disciples. He impresses them simultaneously with an idea or an aspect of truth. By watching their reactions, he can gauge the united activity of the group and the simultaneity of their response. 9. Telepathic work between subjective and objective groups. I do not refer here to the contact between an inner group of disciples, functioning consciously on the subjective levels, and the outer form that group takes. I refer to an inner group and a different outer group or groups. These groups, on both levels, can be either good or bad, according to the quality or caliber of the group personnel and their motives. This opens up a wide range of contacts and is one of the ways in which the hierarchy of masters work, as individuals. It is, however, not possible for groups upon the outer plane to respond to this type of contact until the bulk of their members have the heart center awakened. In this connection, a most interesting point should be noted. The awakening of the heart center indicates inclusiveness, group appreciation and contact, also group thought and group life activity. Unless, however, the head center is also awakened and active, the soul is not able to control, and this heart activity need not necessarily be what we call good or spiritual activity. It is quite impersonal, like the sun, of which the heart is, as you know, the symbol. It shines alike upon the good and the bad, and group activity, as a result of heart awakening, can include the bad groups, 24, as well as the good groups. Therefore you can see the necessity of awakening the head center and bringing in the control of the soul aspect, and hence the emphasis laid upon character building and the need for meditation. 10. Telepathic work between the hierarchy of masters as a group or a part of the hierarchy, and groups of disciples. There is little I can tell you about this, and you would not and could not understand. The experiment we are now making, in connection with the new group of world servers, is related to this form of telepathic work. Some of these forms of telepathic work have necessarily their distorted reflections on the physical plane. These you might like to ponder upon, and trace the correspondences between them. What is mass psychology, with its unreasoning quality and its blind activity, but a massed reaction to solar plexus impressions as passed from group to group? What is public opinion, so-called, but vague mental reactions by the mass of men beginning to grope their way on the mental plane, to the activity and play of more active and powerful minds? The written and spoken words are not in themselves adequate to account for the display of modern opinion as we now have it. What is the apparently accurate information, so rapidly circulated among the savage races, but an expression of that instinctual telepathy which uses the vital body and the pranic fluids as its medium? 3 types of energy involved. Telepathic interrelation between the members of a group grows through the medium of a constant attitude of reflective thought and a steadfast love for each other. I would remind you that when I use these terms I am referring to the 2 major types of energy in the world today. Essentially, energy is active substance. These 2 types of force are of a vitality, potency and substance so subtle and fine that they can work through and force into activity the pranic fluids which constitute the substance of the etheric body and to which I referred in a much earlier instruction, a treatise on the 7 rays, 2, 113. The telepathic work, therefore, is concerned with 3 types of energy which demonstrate as forces with the power to motivate. 1. The force of love with its negative quality which attracts the needed material with which to clothe the idea, the thought or concept to be transmitted. It is also the attractive agency utilized by the recipient. Therefore both transmitter and recipient work with the same agency, but the transmitter uses the love energy of the larger whole whilst the recipient concentrates, upon the transmitter, the love energy of his own nature. If this be so, you can see why I emphasize the necessity for love and for non-criticism. B. Constitutes the coherent quality which links together the transmitter and the recipient, and which also produces the coherency of that which is transmitted. 26. It will be apparent to you consequently that it is only at this time that we can begin to look for a wider and more general expression in the world today of the processes of telepathy, for only today is the love principle really beginning to affect the world on a large scale. Love of a cause, a party or an idea is becoming more and more prevalent, producing in the initial stages the apparently wide cleavages with which we are so familiar and by which we are so distressed at this time, yet producing finally a dominance of the attitudes of love which will heal breaches, and produce synthesis among the peoples. Love, not sentiment, is the clue to successful telepathic work. Therefore love one another with a fresh enthusiasm and devotion. Seek to express that love in every possible way, upon the physical plane, upon the levels of emotion, and through right thought. Let the love of the soul sweep through all like a regenerating force. 2. The force of mind. This is the illuminating energy which lights the way of an idea or form to be transmitted and received. Forget not that light is subtle substance. Upon a beam of light can the energy of the mind materialize. This is one of the most important statements made in connection with the science of telepathy. The success of this is dependent upon the alignment of the bodies of the transmitter and the recipient. The double line of contact must be that of mental energy and brain electrical energy. The magnetic power of love to attract attention, to produce alignment, and to call forth rapport and understanding is not all that is necessary in the new telepathy which will distinguish the new age. There must also be mental development and mental control. This form of telepathy is not a function of the animal soul, as in the case of the solar plexus contact and response, 27, to messages by the emotionally polarized man or woman. This telepathic rapport and response is a characteristic of the human soul working from mind to mind and from brain to brain. It is literally a state of consciousness which is sufficiently conditioned by the integrated mental person so that he is aware of and inclusive of the mental state and thought processes of another person. 3. The energy of prana, or the etheric force of the vital body. This energy, by an act of the will and under the pressure of the magnetic power of love, responds to or is receptive to the dual energies mentioned above. The idea, thought form, or mental impression which must be recorded in the brain consciousness of the recipient opens a way in the pranic fluids and so controls their activity, which is as ceaseless as the thought form making propensities of the chitta, that the brain becomes responsive in two ways. A. It is rendered passive by the impact of the three types of energy, blended and fused into one stream of force. B. It becomes actively responsive to the idea, impression, thought form, symbol, words, etc., which are being swept into the area of its conscious activity. Let me attempt to reduce the above information to practical simplicity, thus showing how these three types of energy can be used in practical work. 1. By the use of the energy of love in three ways. A. By sending out love, not sentiment, to your brothers at the time of transmission or reception. 28. B. By capitalizing on the inherent power of love to attract the material or the substance, and thus to clothe, in the occult sense that which you send out. C. By sending forth the clothed idea, impression, etc., on a stream of love which your brother, alert, receptive and waiting, will attract to himself by the means of his conscious love for you. 2. By the use of mental energy through the effort to polarize yourself upon the mental levels of consciousness. By a definite act of the will you lift your consciousness onto the mental plane and hold it there. This action is a reflection upon a lower plane, and in the brain consciousness, of the mind's ability to hold itself in the light. The success of all telepathic work you do, as a group or as individuals, will be dependent upon your capacity to hold yourselves steady in the light. Mentally, the difference is that this time you do it for the purpose of the planned work, and attempt to hold the mind steady in the light of the group, or in each other's light, and not so specifically in the light of your own soul. 3. By the conscious organized use of the energy of the etheric ajna center, and sometimes of the head center, when receiving, and of the throat center, when transmitting. This swings etheric force into activity when engaged in telepathic work, but entails its conscious subordination to the power of the other two energies. Practically, you will observe that this involves on the part of the disciple the power to do three things at once. You need to ponder more deeply upon the fact and necessity of active outgoing energy, 29. When you are occupied with the task of transmission, and with active receptivity when you are functioning as a receiver. I would like to point out that successful telepathic work is dependent upon the following factors. First, that there are no barriers existing between the receiver and the broadcaster. Such barriers would be lack of love or of sympathy, criticism and suspicion. Secondly, that the broadcaster is mainly occupied with the clarity of his symbol, with the word or thought, and not with the receiver. A quick glance toward the receiver, a momentary sending forth of love and understanding is sufficient to set up the rapport, and then attention must be paid to the clarity of the symbol. Thirdly, let the receivers think with love and affection of the broadcaster for a minute or two. Then let them forget the personality. A thread of energy, linking receiver and broadcaster, has been established and exists. Then forget it. Fourthly, let the receivers work with detachment. Most receivers are so anxious to receive correctly that through their very intensity they counteract their own efforts. A casual and don't care spirit and a close attentiveness to the inner picturing faculty will net better results than any violent and strong desire and effort to see the symbol and to contact the mind of the sender. The brain should register a reflection of the mind content. If a ray of light is met by an outgoing force from the receiver's mind or a powerfully emitted thought form, it can be prevented from reaching the mind. However, a transmitter with more expert training can overcome this barrier. Much of the trouble will be found to be based on the emitted thought forms, or in the rush of ill-regulated, mental energy or brain radiation which negates efforts. Therefore a quiet spirit and well-regulated thoughts will aid much, and the cultivation of that dispassion which desires nothing for the separated self, and nothing violently. The need of sensitive receivers is great. Train yourselves. Forget yourselves and your own petty little affairs, so petty and unimportant when viewed in relation to the momentous issues of the present time. Keep an attentive ear to the voices which issue forth from the world of spiritual being, and love each other with loyalty and steadfastness. 31. The growth of telepathic rapport. I would like to point out that the use of words telepathically must be mastered as a preliminary step to the use of sentences and of thoughts. Choose a word and meditate upon it, knowing wherefore you have chosen it. Study it in the 4 ways indicated by Patanjali. The Light of the Soul, page 33, that is. 1. Study its form, study it symbolically, as a word picture. 2. Study it from the angle of quality, of beauty, of desire. 3. Study its underlying purpose and teaching value, and its mental appeal. 4. Study its very being and identify yourself with its divine underlying idea. When you have reached this final stage, hold your consciousness steady at that high point as you, if you are a transmitter, send out the word to the receiver or to the receiving group. Receivers should in their turn achieve, as far as they can, complete alignment so as to be responsive to all these 4 aspects of the word. This method will serve to shift the receiver nearer to the plane where he should function, the level of the higher mind. The word goes out upon the life breath of the transmitter. His lower mind then sends out the purpose aspect. His astral consciousness is responsible for sending out the quality aspect, and the form aspect is sent out as he says the word, very softly and in a whisper. The above is a good exercise and very simple. Telepathic power should greatly increase if one faithfully follows these 4 stages, up and within, down and without. In the 32. Work of transmitting. During the first or form stage one may use what symbolic forms one likes to embody the word, for such a word as will has no appropriate form like pool has. One may, if he choose, preserve the word form, seeing it letter for letter or as a whole. But one must be sure to end with the picture form or the word form with which he began, and that he sends out, at the close, what he formulated at the beginning. To summarize, a group of disciples working in an ashram has to learn that 1. Groups are held together by an inner structure of thought. 2. The focus of the externalized group life is the etheric body. The etheric body is a receiving agency, b. a circulating medium for energy coming from the mind, from the soul, from the master, or from the group mind. 3. The mind is the first exoteric expression of the soul consciousness, as far as the true aspirant is concerned. 4. the following telepathic relationships are possible and must be borne in mind. A. Solar plexus to solar plexus. B. Mind to mind. C. Master to disciple. D. Groups of disciples to other similar groups. E. Subjective groups to objective receptive groups. F. The hierarchy, through its great leaders, to the various ashrams of the masters. 33. G. The hierarchy to the new group of world servers. 5. The major factors which must be considered in all telepathic work are: A. The initiating agent or emanating source. B. The recipient of the ideas, thoughts or energy. C. The medium of revelation. The growth of telepathic rapport will bring in an era of universality and synthesis, with its qualities of recognized relationships and responsiveness. This will be, outstandingly, the glory of the Aquarian Age. As the race achieves increasingly a mental polarization through the developing attractive power of the mental principle, the use of language for the conveying of thoughts between equals or of communicating with superiors will fall into disuse. It will continue to be used in reaching the masses and those not functioning upon the mental plane. Already voiceless prayer and aspiration and worship are deemed of higher value than the pleadings and proclamations of voiced expression. It is for this stage in the unfoldment of the race for which preparation must be made, and the laws, techniques and process of telepathic communication must be made plain so that they can be intelligently and theoretically understood. Disciples must occupy themselves increasingly with right understanding, right designation and right definition of the new science of telepathy. Mental comprehension and mental sympathy will make true interplay possible, and this will bridge between the old way of understanding thought through the medium of the spoken or written word, embodying that thought as the individual thinker seeks to convey it, and the future stage of immediate response to 34. Thought, unlimited by speech or other medium of expression. Disciples will endeavor to work in both ways, and the medium of normal human relations and that of supernormal subjective relations must be studied by them and expressed by them. In this way the time of bridging and the period of transition can be spanned. It will take about 500 years for the race to become normally telepathic, and when I say normally I mean consciously. This bridging work must be carried forward by disciples in 3 ways. 1. By an endeavor to understand. A. The medium of transmission. B. The method of transmission. C. The manner of reception. D. The mode of interrelated activity. 2. By the cultivation of sensitive reactions to each other and to the other human units with whom the lot of the disciples may be cast. This involves: A. Sensitive physical reaction, via the centers, to the forces emanating from the centers of those with whom the disciples are associated. Particularly should the sensitivity of the ajna center be developed. B. Sensitivity to the state of feeling or to the emotional reactions of those around. This is done through the development of compassion and of sympathy, plus that detachment which will enable one to take right action. C. Sensitivity to the thoughts of others through mental rapport with them upon the plane of mind. 35. 3. By all these done also in group formation as well as individually. All the activities mentioned above must constitute group activity. In these 3 ways the vehicle of the personality can be so conditioned that it can become a sensitive receiving apparatus. When, however, soul consciousness is achieved or developing, then this triple instrument is superseded by the intuitional receptivity of the soul, whose inclusiveness is absolute and who is at one with the soul in all forms. Those disciples who are working along this line are the nurturers of the seed of the future intuitional civilization, which will come to its full glory in the Aquarian Age. The intuition is the infallibly sensitive agent, latent in every human being. It is based, as you know, upon direct knowledge, unimpeded by any instrument normally functioning in the 3 worlds. Of this intuitional future age, Christ is the seedman, for he knew what was in man. Today, a group or a unit of groups can be the nurturers of the seed of the intuition. The cultivation of sensitivity to telepathic impression is one of the most potent agencies in developing the coming use of the intuitive faculty. The truly telepathic man is the man who is responsive to impressions coming to him from all forms of life in the three worlds, but he is also equally responsive to impressions coming to him from the world of souls and the world of the intuition. It is the development of the telepathic instinct which will eventually make a man a master in the three worlds, and also in the five worlds of human and superhuman development. By a process of withdrawal, of occult abstraction, and of concentration upon the telepathic cult, the whole science of telepathy, as a seed of a future racial potency, can be developed and understood. This is a process now going forward, and it is going on in two ways. 36. Through the medium of telepathic groups and of telepathic people, and through the medium of exoteric scientific investigation. The building of the thought form which will accustom the race to the idea of telepathic work is proceeding apace, and the seed of this development is becoming very vital and powerful and germinating with real rapidity. It is, in the last analysis, the seed of masterhood. 37. V. Group telepathic work. I shall now take up with you the subject of united group telepathic work, its possibilities and the present opportunity, touching upon the dangers involved and the responsibility which will rest upon your shoulders and upon those of all disciples who may attempt to work in this way. You need to bear in mind the following three injunctions. First, it is essential that you acquire facility in tuning in on each other with deepest love and understanding, that you develop impersonality so that when a brother tunes in on a weakness or a strength, upon a mistake or a right attitude, it evokes from you no slightest reaction that could upset the harmony of the group united work as planned. That you cultivate a love which will ever seek to strengthen and to help, and a power to supplement or complement each other which will be of use in balancing the group. As a working unit under spiritual impression, the discovery of a weakness in a group brother should only produce the evocation of a deeper love. The discovery that you have made a mistake, if you have, in interpreting a brother, should only prompt you to a renewed vital effort to approach more closely to his soul. The revelation to you of a brother's strength will indicate where you can look for help in any hour of your own need. State frankly what you feel as you work month after month at this task of group rapport, deliberately tuning out criticism and substituting for it analysis. An analysis impersonally given. State truthfully what you sense and register. Your conclusions may be right or wrong, but a definite effort to comply and to recognize consciously the gained impression should aid the group blending without undue delay into an instrument of sensitive understanding. If disciples cannot tune in on each other, 38, with ease after long periods of close relationship, how can they, as a group, tune in on some individual or some group of individuals unknown to them in their personalities? Unless such interplay is established fundamentally and unless there is a close integration between the members who constitute the group, it will not be possible for constructively useful and spiritually oriented and controlled work to be properly carried forward and successfully accomplished. But it is a task which you can accomplish if you will, and real application over a period of time should enable the group to work smoothly and well together. The 3 Rules for Beginners, earlier given, a treatise on white magic, page 320, embody the first steps leading to the attitude required in true hierarchical work. This is the objective of the accepted disciple. Secondly, your constant effort, to be carried forward steadily and slowly, must be to bring about a group love of such strength that nothing can break it and no barriers rise up between you. To cultivate a group sensitivity of such a quality that your diagnosis of conditions will be relatively accurate. To develop and unfold a group ability to work as a unit, so that there will be nothing in the inner attitudes of any of the group members which could break into the carefully established rhythm. For it is quite possible for a member of the group to retard the work and to hold back the group because he is so engrossed in his own affairs or in his own ideas of self-development. When some members cease their activity, it does affect the inner group vibration. When others become slowed up by definite changes in their outer or inner lives, this requires periods of adjustment and oft of reorganization of the life. These changes, being externalized, can produce powerful psychological changes and upset the rhythm of the soul's endeavor. A tried and 39 Experienced disciple will not let such a change upset his inner rhythm, but a less experienced disciple needs real soul watchfulness to the danger of sidetracking the life interest from spiritual purposes to personality attentions and interests. Thirdly, any group work of this kind must be most carefully controlled. Any group effort which seeks to impress the mind of any subject, whether an individual or a group, must be strenuously guarded as to motive and method. Any group endeavor which involves a united applied effort to effect changes in the point of view, an outlook on life, or a technique of living must be utterly selfless, most wisely and cautiously undertaken, and must be kept free from any personality emphasis, any personality pressure and any mental pressure which is formulated in terms of individual belief, prejudice, dogmatism or ideas. I would ask you to study the above few words most carefully. The moment that there is the least tendency on the part of a group, or of an individual in a group, to force an issue, to bring so much mental pressure to bear that an individual or group is helpless under the impact of other minds, you have what is called black magic. Right motive may protect the group from any serious results to themselves, but the effect upon their victim will be definitely serious, rendering him negative, and with a weakened will. The result of all true telepathic work and rightly directed effort to impress a subject will be to leave him with a strengthened will to right action, an intensified interior light, an astral body freer from glamour, and a physical body more vital and purer. The potency of a united group activity is incredibly powerful. The occult aphorism that energy follows thought is either a statement of a truth or else a meaningless phrase. 40. Forget not that the method of work of the hierarchy is that of impression upon the minds of their disciples, of telepathic work carried on with the master as broadcaster and the disciple as the recipient of impression and of energy. This reception of impression and energy has a dual effect. 1. It brings into activity the latent seeds of action and of habits, good or bad, thus producing revelation, purification, enrichment and usefulness. 2. It vitalizes and galvanizes the personality into a right relation to the soul, to the environment, and to humanity. It is necessary for you and for all disciples to grasp the correspondence to this hierarchical effort and any effort which you may make in order to work as a group of individuals with groups or individuals. An appreciation of the power which you may let loose, of the dynamic effect which you may succeed in awakening in the subject of your directed thought, and of the impression which you may imprint in the mind and consciousness of the subject should incite you to a guarded purity of life, astral and physical, to a watchfulness over thoughts and ideas, and to a love which will safeguard you from all love of power. Thus you will preserve the integrity of those you seek to help and will be enabled to suggest, to strengthen and to teach subjectively with no undue influence, no forcing, and no infringement of the liberty and spiritual franchise of the person concerned. A difficult task, my brothers, but one to which you are equal, given due attention and obedience to the above three injunctions as to motive, technique and method. 41. 7. The science of impression. The entire subject of telepathic communication can be approached under a more subjective designation or name, but one which is interpretive of the more universal and prior stage than that of direct telepathic reception. The occultist ever approaches the subject connected with the evolutionary process from the angle of the whole and then the part, from the periphery to the center, from the universal to the particular. Among themselves, the masters do not deal with telepathy as a science warranting consideration, endeavor and importation. They are concerned primarily with the science of impression. The term most often employed by them is the esoteric equivalent of what the average person means when he says, "I have an impression." Impression is the subtlest reaction, more or less accurate, to the vibratory mental activity of some other mind or group of minds, of some whole, as its radiatory influence affects the unit or aggregate of units. The first stage of correct telepathic reception is ever the registering of an impression. It is generally vague at the beginning, but as a thought, idea, purpose or intention of the sending agent concretizes, it slips into the second stage which appears as a definite thought form. Finally, that thought form makes its impact upon the consciousness of the brain in the location lying just behind the ajna center and consequently in the area of the pituitary body. It can appear also in the region of the solar plexus center. But for those lives who have surmounted life in the three worlds and who are not conditioned by the triple mechanism of the personality, the impression is the factor of importance. Their consciousness is impressed, and so sensitive is their response to the higher impression, that they 42, absorb or appropriate the impression so that it becomes a part of their own impulsive energy. This is by no means an easy subject for me to elucidate, and the reasons are two. 1. The members of the hierarchy, among whom I have the status of master. Discipleship in the New Age, I. 777, are themselves in process of learning this science of impression. This they do on the levels of the abstract mind, of the intuition, or of manas and buddhi. 2. The science is as yet without a vocabulary. It is not limited at any stage by thought forms, but it is limited by word forms, and it is therefore a difficult problem for me to pass on any information anent this subtle mode of communication, of which telepathy is in fact but an exoteric externalization. Impression, as an art to be mastered both from the angle of the impressing agent and of the impressed recipient, is definitely related to the world of ideas. As far as our planetary life is concerned, there are certain great sources of impression, and one or two of them might here be noted. You will thus gain some idea of the subtlety of the whole subject, of its close relation to energy impacts, and of its group reception as differentiated from individual reception, as is the case in any telepathic rapport. 1. The impression of Shambhala by a. members of the Great White Lodge on Sirius. The recipients of this impression are the highest members of the Great Council, presided over by the Lord of the World. So subtle is this 43 impression that these great lives can only receive it with accuracy when in full joint conference of the entire council, and also after due preparation. b. From one or other of the constellations which are at any particular time astrologically en rapport with our planet. This impression can only be received by the Great Council when sitting in conclave with a majority of its members present. This, I would have you note, does not entail the attendance of the entire council. c. From a triangle of circulating energy, emanating from the two planets which, with our planet, the Earth, form a triangle in any particular cycle. This impression is received by the three Buddhas of activity for distribution to the hierarchy. d. From the planet Venus, the Earth's alter ego. This makes its entrance via the Lord of the World and three of his council who are chosen by him at any specific time to act as recipients. These are the major entering impressions, recorded by what is glibly called the universal mind, the mind of God, our planetary logos. There are other entering impressions, but to them I do not refer, as any reference would be meaningless to you. 2. The impression of the hierarchy by a. Shambhala itself through the medium of groups within the Great Council. These step down the impression which they register so that the hierarchy, as a whole, may cooperate with the purposes intended by those who are forming the needed plan. 44. b. Certain great lives who, at specific times and according to cyclic rhythm, or in times of emergency, are swung into this type of activity. For instance, one such time would be the full moon period, which is a time of reception by the hierarchy as well as by humanity. An instance of the second type of activity would be the Wesak festival, or those acute crises when intervention is required from sources far higher than those with which the recipient is usually en rapport. Such a crisis is fast approaching. The first type of impression is rhythmic, recurrent and therefore cumulative in its intended effects. The second type of impression is the result of invocation and evocation and is dependent upon both the recipient and the agent. c. That great group of divine contemplatives who are trained to act as an intermediate receptive group between Shambhala and the hierarchy. They receive impression from Shambhala and transmit it to the hierarchy, thus enabling the members of the hierarchy to receive it as a sharpened impression, and to register it accurately because the emanating impression has passed through an area within the divine mind where it is enhanced by the trained perception and the determined receptivity of this group. They are called, in the East, the divine Nirmanakayas. I only mention their occult name so that you may learn to recognize them when you meet reference to them. D. The Buddha at the time when the Wesak festival is celebrated. He then acts as a focal point or as the distributor of the impression. He then has 45. Behind him, little as you may realize it, the entire impressing force of the Buddhas of activity who are to Shambhala what the Nirmanakayas are to the hierarchy. Let me here interpolate a remark which may prove helpful and illuminating. We are dealing, as you will undoubtedly have noted, with the reception of impression by groups or by aggregations of groups composed of living beings who have their own agents of distribution or impression. The entire evolutionary history of our planet is one of reception and of distribution, of a taking in and of a giving out. The key to humanity's trouble, focusing, as it has, in the economic troubles of the past 200 years, and in the theological impasse of the Orthodox churches, has been to take and not to give, to accept and not to share, to grasp and not to distribute. This is the breaking of the law which has placed humanity in the position of guilt. The war is the dire penalty which humanity has had to pay for this great sin of separateness. Impressions from the hierarchy have been received, distorted, misapplied and misinterpreted, and the task of the new group of world servers is to offset this evil. These servers are to humanity what the Buddhas of activity are to Shambhala, and the group of divine contemplatives, the Nirmanakayas, are to the hierarchy. It might be stated therefore that 1. The Buddhas of activity are themselves impressed by the will of God as it energizes the entire planetary life. 2. The Nirmanakayas are impressed by the love of God as it demonstrates itself as the attractive force which impulses the plan inspired by the purpose. In other words, it is the hierarchy, impelled to action, 46, by Shambhala, or the will to good, externalizing itself as goodwill. 3. The new group of world servers are impressed by the active intelligence of God. They translate this divine impression and step it down in 2 great stages, therefore, bringing it into concrete manifestation. We now carry this conception of divine impression down to the level of the human consciousness. 3. The impression of humanity by a. The hierarchy, through the stimulating of ideas. These demonstrate through a steadily growing and enlightened public opinion. b. The influence of the ashrams of the masters as they affect the aspirants of the world, the humanitarians and the idealists. These impressing agencies, being 7 in number, constitute 7 different streams of impressing energy which affect the 7 ray types. The united ashrams, forming the great ashram of the Christ, affect humanity as a whole. This great united ashram works solely through the new group of world servers whose members are on all rays, of all grades of development, and who work in all the various departments of human living and enterprise. c. The activity of the new group of world servers about which I have already written in my various pamphlets, therefore repetition is not necessary. A treatise on the 7 rays, 2, 629 to 751. A treatise on white magic, 398 to 433. It will be obvious to you that I have only touched upon a very few, of the impressing forces of the planet, and have 47 enumerated only a few of the major groups which are, in their intrinsic nature, both recipients of impression and agents later of the impressing agent. When we arrive at the human family, this reciprocal activity is blocked by human selfishness. It is this interruption of impression, and this interference with the divine circulatory flow, which, as I have said above, is responsible for sin, for disease, and for all the various factors which make humanity today what it is. When the free flow of divine energy, of divine interplay and of spiritual purpose is re-established, then evil will disappear and the will to good will become factual goodwill upon the outer physical plane. In the statements given above in connection with the 3 great planetary centers you have the basis for the new and coming approach to divinity which will be known under the expression, invocative and evocative religion. It is this new science of impression which forms the subjective basis and the uniting element which binds together the entire realm of knowledge, of science and of religion. The fundamental ideas which underlie these great areas of human thought all emanate from intuitional levels. they finally condition the human consciousness, evoking man's aspiration to penetrate deeper into the arcana of all wisdom, for which knowledge is the preparatory stage. This science of impression is the mode of life of the subjective world which lies between the world of external happenings, the world of appearances and of exoteric manifestation, and the inner world of reality. This is a point which should be most carefully taken into the calculations of the occult investigators. Impressions are received and registered. They form the basis of reflection for those aspirants who are sensitive enough to their impact and wise enough to record carefully in consciousness their emanating source. After due practice, this period of brooding upon the registered, 48, impression is followed by another period wherein the impression begins to take form as an idea. From that point it follows the familiar course of translation from an idea into a presented ideal. It then comes under the invocative appeal of the more concrete-minded until it finally precipitates itself into outer manifestation and takes form. You will see, therefore, that what I am doing is to take the student a step further into the world of reception and perception and point him to the more subtle contacts which lie behind those concepts which are regarded as definitely nebulous and to which we give the name of intuitions. The science of impression, if studied by the disciples in the world and by the new group of world servers, will greatly facilitate the presentation of those ideals which must and will condition the thinking of the new age and will eventually produce the new culture and the new civilized expression which lies ahead of humanity, superseding the present civilization and providing the next field of expression for mankind. This science is, in fact, the basis of the theory of relationships and will lead to the expansion of the idea of right human relations, which has hitherto, as a phrase, been confined to an ideal desire for correct interplay between man and man, group and group, and nation and nation. It has also hitherto been restricted to the human society and interplay, and remains as yet a hope and a wish. When, however, the science of impression has been correctly apprehended and has been brought down to the level of an educational objective, it will be found to be closely linked to the emerging teaching anent invocation and evocation and will be expanded to include not only right human relations to the superhuman kingdoms, but right human relations with the subhuman kingdoms also. It will, therefore, be concerned with the sensitive response of the entire natural and supernatural world to the One in whom we 49 live and move and have our being. It will put mankind into a right relationship with all aspects and expressions of the divine nature, deepening subjective contact and bringing about a diviner objective manifestation and one more in line with divine purpose. It will lead to a great shift of the human consciousness off the levels of emotional and physical life, where the bulk of humanity is focused, onto the levels of mental perception. You will understand, consequently, the reason why the knowers of the world have ever referred to the dual action of the mind, as it is sensitive to the higher impressions and active in the mental creation of the needed thought forms. The mind, rightly trained, will seize upon the fugitive impression, subject it to the concretizing effect of mental activity, produce the required form, and this, when correctly created and oriented, will finally lead to the externalizing of the registered impression, as it took form in an intuition and eventually found its place upon the mental plane. You will see also why disciples and world workers have to function as minds, as receptive and perceptive intelligences and as creators in mental matter. It is all related to this science of impression with which we have been dealing. You will note also that this whole process is capable of expansion in the processes of meditation, so that the aspirant can be sensitive to impression and, because he is oriented to the world of ideas and is aware of the subtlety and delicacy of the apparatus required to register the overshadowing cloud of knowable things, is safeguarded from the sensitivity required to register impacts from other minds, good or bad in their orientation, and from the thought currents of that which is in process of taking form, as well as from the powerful pull or urge of the emotional and desire reactions of the astral plane and of the emotionally polarized world in which he lives physically. 50. More understanding will come also if you grasp the fact that this science of impression is concerned with the activity of the head center as an anchoring center for the antakarana, and that the ajna center is concerned with the process of translating the recorded intuition into a form, through recognition of and reaction to a mental thought form, and its subsequent direction, as an ideal objective, into the world of men. In the early stages and until the third initiation, the science of impression is concerned with the establishing of a sensitivity, an invocative sensitivity between the spiritual triad temporarily expressing itself through the abstract mind and the soul or the son of mind, and the concrete mind. This mental triangle is a reflection, in time and space, of the monad and of the two higher aspects of the triad, and is reflected, after the process of invocation and a succeeding process of evocation, in another triad, that of the lower mind, the soul and the vital body. When the relation between the lower and the higher mind is correctly and stable established, you have the swinging into activity of the lowest triad connected with the science of impression, the head center, the ajna center and the throat center. In the above I have given you an interesting and brief elucidation of the technique to be applied to the energizing of the centers in the human body. I would remind you that what is true of the individual disciple must be and is true of that great disciple. Humanity, the entire human family. It is also true, as an outgrowth of this idea, of all the three planetary centers, Shambhala, the hierarchy and humanity. The name science of impression is that given to the process whereby the establishment of the required relationship in all these units of life takes place. The technique of invocation and evocation is the name given to the mode or method whereby the desired relationship is brought about. 51. The creative work is the name given to the manifestation of the results of the two above processes. The three aspects of the technique of invocation and evocation with which the average disciple should concern himself are those of the building of the antakarana, the correct use of the lower mind in its two higher functions, the holding of the mind steady in the light and the creation of the desired thought forms, and the process of precipitation whereby the impression is enabled eventually to take tangible form. In the above exegesis I have given you much food for thought in connection with telepathic possibilities. It all fits into the theme of world service as it is to be applied in the expansion of the human consciousness on a large scale. This is one of the major tasks of the new group of world servers. 52. 8. The supreme science of contact. It would be useful if you attempted to master and to assimilate what I have to impart anent the three great sciences which form the three modes of expression of what we might term the supreme science of contact. These three sciences are all equally interdependent and all related to the art of responsiveness. They are: 1. The science of impression, the will to be. Relation to the spiritual triad. Source of emanation, Shambhala. Connected with the abstract mind. 2. The science of invocation and evocation, love or attraction. Relation to the soul in all forms. Source of emanation, at this time, the hierarchy. Connected with the lower mind, as the agent of the soul. 3. The science of telepathy, mind. Human intelligence. Relation to the personality. Source of emanation, humanity itself. Connected with the head center. You will see how all these pairs of opposites play their part, exemplifying the dualistic nature of our planetary life. 53. 1. The abstract mind and the lower mind. 2. The soul and the lower mind. 3. The lower mind and the head center. Each of them acts as an invocative agent and produces evocation. All act as recipients and as transmitters, and all of them together establish the group interrelation and the circulation of the energies which are the distinctive characteristic of the entire world of force. One point you all need to grasp is that the progressing disciple does not move into new fields or areas of awareness, like a steady marching forward from one plane to another, as the visual symbols of the theosophical literature would indicate. What must be grasped is that all that is ever present. What we are concerned with is the constant awakening to that which eternally is, and to what is ever present in the environment but of which the subject is unaware, owing to short-sightedness. The aim must be to overcome the undue concentration upon the foreground of daily life which characterizes most people, the intense preoccupation with the interior states or moods of the lower self which characterizes the spiritually minded people and the aspirants, and the imperviousness or lack of sensitivity which characterizes the mass of men. The kingdom of God is present on earth today and forever has been, but only a few, relatively speaking, are aware of its signs and manifestations. The world of subtle phenomena, called formless, because unlike the physical phenomena with which we are so familiar, is ever with us and can be seen and contacted and proved as a field for experiment and experience and activity if the mechanism of perception is developed as it surely can be. The sounds and sights of the heavenly world, as the mystics call it, are as clearly perceived by 54. The higher initiate as are the sights and sounds of the physical plane as you contact it in your daily round of duties. The world of energies, with its streams of directed force and its centers of concentrated light, is likewise present, and the eye of the seer can see it, just as the eye of the mental clairvoyant can see the geometrical pattern which thoughts assume upon the mental plane, or as the lower psychic can contact the glamours, the illusions and delusions of the astral world. The subjective realm is vitally more real than is the objective, once it is entered and known. It is simply, how simple to some and how insuperably difficult to others, apparently. A question of the acceptance, first of all, of its existence, the development of a mechanism of contact, the cultivation of the ability to use this mechanism at will, and then inspired interpretation. It might be said that consciousness itself, which is the goal, on this planet, of all the evolutionary process, is simply the demonstrated result of the science of contact. It is likewise the goal in some form or other and at some stage or other of all planetary existences within the solar system itself. The unfoldment of this conscious response is, in reality, the growth of the sensitive awareness of the planetary logos himself. The human mechanism and its ability to respond to its environment, as science well knows, has been developed in response to an inner urge, present in every human being and in all forms of life, and to the pull and magnetic effect of the surrounding environment. Step by step, the forms of life upon the physical plane, down through the ages, have unfolded one sense after another. One form of sensitive response after another becomes possible as the mechanism is produced, until the human being can receive impressions from the physical plane and rightly interpret them, can respond to the emotional contacts of the astral plane and succumb to them or, 55, surmount them, and can become telepathic to the world of the mental plane, thus sharing, physically, emotionally and mentally, in the life and contacts of the three worlds which constitute his environment and in which he is submerged whilst in incarnation. What he gets out of this life of constant impression is largely dependent upon his power to invoke his environment and draw from it, in evocative response, what he needs in all the various departments of his being. This, in its turn, forces him, whether he likes it or not, to produce an effect upon other people. This can be far more potent for good or evil, and from the telepathic angle, than he likes to think or can conceive. You see, therefore, how these sciences of impression, of invocation and evocation, and of telepathy are naturally concerned with what is inherent in man and in his relation to his environment and circumstances. The germ or embryonic capacity for all types of planetary contact is inherent in every man and will not be frustrated in the long run. In this knowledge of goals already achieved in the three worlds lies the guarantee of achievement in the more subjective worlds which are present within the aspirant's surroundings but to which he remains as yet unawakened and unenlightened. I am seeking to make the matter as simple as I can, for much of the abstract formulations of the occult sciences and the academic psychologists are incident to the overactivity of men's minds and emotional natures. If you can grasp certain broad and relatively simple facts and recognize that you possess the key or the clue in your already developed capacities, then you will go forward with simplicity, making no undue intellectual difficulties when dealing with these more subtle phases of your ever-existent environment. It is, in the last analysis, just a question as to what impresses you at any given moment, and then in what manner it conditions you. 56. You will see, therefore, how much that I have already said links up with the teaching I have given upon the points of revelation. In the very condensed summation of the science of impression, I touched briefly upon the three great groups of lives that are constantly under impression, and which, in their turn, become impressing agents. There is little that can be added to this theme with profit at this time. What has already been given should be studied and related to the teaching on the points of revelation. Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, Section 3. Revelation is a generic term covering all the responses to the activities of the eye of the mind, the eye of the soul, and the insight of the universal mind which contact with the monad gives. Sight is the greatest of all the developments in this world period in which the Logos is seeking to bring the subhuman kingdoms to the point where human vision is theirs, to bring humanity to the point where spiritual vision is developed and hierarchical insight is the normal quality of the initiate sight, and to bring the members of the hierarchy to the point where universal perception is theirs. Therefore, it might be said that 1. Through the door of individualization the subhuman kingdoms pass to human vision, leading to mental contact and intelligent impression. 2. Through the door of initiation humanity passes to spiritual vision, leading to soul contact and spiritual impression. 3. Through the door of identification the hierarchy passes to universal vision, leading to monadic contact and extraplanetary impression. Each time that there is a fresh vision of a compelling and conditioning nature, it is the result of invocation by the 57, one seeking the new impression. When this invocative spirit is present, the results are inevitable and sure and the response evoked cannot be stopped. This is the basis of all the success of desire, material or otherwise, aspiration, prayer and meditation. Always we get, in time and space, what we invoke, and the knowledge of this fact, scientifically applied, will be one of the great liberating forces for humanity. 58. Expanding areas of conscious interaction. The training given by the masters in their ashrams to their disciples has one main objective: to increase, develop and enable them to utilize in service their inherent and innate sensitivity. Let us, as we discuss these matters, avoid that much overworked word, vibration, and use instead the more simple and more easily understood word, impact. Response to impact is something we all register. Our five senses have opened to all people five great realms from which impact comes, and we are so familiar with them all that our response is now automatic and, though registered, is not consciously so, unless there is a planned reason and direction intended. We respond similarly and as automatically to emotional stimuli, and rapidly, very rapidly, the race is reaching out towards mental telepathy. Some few are beginning to work along the lines of spiritual telepathy. Few do more than register occasionally contacts emanating from a high source, and the result is usually also overmixed with personality reactions. Contact, with resultant impact from the soul, is also quite rapidly developing, hence the necessity for my laying the foundations of further knowledge which will clarify still higher contact, emanating from the spiritual triad and opening up areas of interaction hitherto known only to the hierarchy. I refer here to the teaching which I have given out through a group of my disciples anent the Antikarana. Education in the New Age. A Treatise on the Seven Rays, Volume 5. All such developing contacts involve conditions covered by the two words, contact and impact. 59. 1. Contact can be defined, for our particular purposes, as recognition of an environment, an area of the hitherto unknown, of that which has somehow been evoked, of a something other which has made its presence felt. This something other than the perceiver has usually been earlier sensed, has been propounded into a theoretical possibility, has later been invoked by the directed and conscious attention of the one who has sensed its presence, and finally contact is made. 2. Impact is something more than simply registering contact. 2. Impact is something more than simply registering contact. It develops into conscious interaction, it conveys later information, it is revelatory in nature, and can be defined in its initial stages as the guarantee to the one who responds to it of a new area for exploration and for spiritual adventure, and as the indication of a wider field wherein consciousness may expand more and register increasingly the divine purpose waiting to be more fully known. Therefore, from the more normal field of what we may call ordinary telepathic perception, just now coming to recognition by ordinary science, through a slowly learnt process of invocation and evocation, to a state of consciousness distinguished by a trained sensitivity, the disciple moves. He unfolds a spiritual recognition which is controlled, understood, and directed to useful hierarchical ends. In these words, you have a very simple definition of the process to which we give, technically, the name, the science of impression. Another point to remember is that this science is the basic science of sensitivity. It is the art of all responsiveness to phenomena and is peculiarly applied to the reaction, the recognition, the responsiveness, and the registration of all 60 phenomena to be found throughout the cosmic physical plane. This is the plane whereon our entire threefold planetary life finds expression and which we have subdivided, for the sake of clear thinking, into the 7 planes, so-called, of our solar system, from what we call our lowest physical plane up to our highest plane, the logoic. In the earlier stages of responsiveness to the 2 phases of contact and impact, the first task is to develop the needed apparatus of contact, the medium of learning, the mechanism of registration, and then learning to use it constructively and intelligently. This work proceeds from cycle to cycle, in the earliest stages, with no conscious intention on the part of the unit of life, thus developing. Yet field after field of consciousness is slowly recorded, and area after area of the surrounding physical, mental and spiritual worlds come within the arena of perception, and are mastered and controlled, until eventually the unit of life, I know not what else to call it, becomes the human being, self-directed, and individual. Finally the man becomes the master, controlling and directing within the periphery of his wide awareness, in consonance with the divine mind and plan. But, and this is a point I seek to impress upon you, humanity, subjected to this constant process of expansion from the emergence of the 4th kingdom in nature, the human, has now reached the stage where it can begin to pass out of the control of what has been called the law of triple response into a new phase of unfoldment where a recognized dualism dominates. This is a most important statement. Let me word it in this way and let me commend to you a very careful consideration of my words. I will express what I seek to impart in certain short sentences and in tabulation form. 1. The advanced man in the 3 worlds is conscious of 2 inherent triplicities, a. The lower man, physical body, astral nature, mind. b. The 3 periodical vehicles, monad, soul, personality. 2. Soul and personality have made contact. He is now technically soul-infused. 2 periodical vehicles have been at one. 3 lower vehicles and the soul are united. 3. The etheric body is at the point of assuming great power. It can now be consciously used as a transmitter of a. Energy and forces, consciously directed. b. Impacts from the highest of the periodical vehicles, working through its instrument, the spiritual triad. 4. The etheric body is, therefore, the agent consciously directed, of the rapidly integrating spiritual unity. It can convey into the brain the needed energies and that occult information which together make a man a master of the wisdom and eventually a Christ, all-inclusive in his developed attractive and magnetic power. Elsewhere I made the following statement which, as you study it, will summarize the above detailed analysis. I said, defining impression, that it concerns the engendering of a magnetic aura on which the highest impressions can play. This might also serve as a definition of the art of invocation and evocation. As the man, for we will not consider this science apart from him, as it would include too vast a field, becomes sensitive to his environment, as the forces of 62 evolution play upon him and lead him on from stage to stage, from point to point, from plane to plane, and from height to height, he becomes enriched and increasingly magnetic. As this attractive or magnetic force increases, he himself becomes invocative. This outgoing demand, emanating from or through the aura which he has engendered, brings to him a developing revelation. This revelation, in its turn, enriches the magnetic field of his aura so that he becomes a revealing center to those whose field of experience and aura need the stimulus of his practiced assurance. Finally, it might be said that the entire human kingdom will eventually be a major magnetic center upon our planet, invoking all the higher kingdoms upon the formless planes and evoking all the lower or subhuman kingdoms upon the planes of form. Someday, 2/3 of the human family will be sensitive to impacts coming from the mind of God, as that mind fulfills its intentions and carries out its purposes within our planetary ring pass not. In its turn, humanity will provide the area of mind within whose ring pass not the subhuman kingdoms will find the correspondence of the universal mind which they need for their unfoldment. Man, as you well know, is the macrocosm for the microcosm of the lower kingdoms in nature. This is the goal of all human service. What I have said up to this point anent the science of impression, if read also in connection with the teaching on the points of revelation, Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, Section 3, will convey much enlightenment. However, deep reflection is called for. The science of impression might be regarded, in the last analysis, as the fundamental science of consciousness itself, for the result of contact and impact leads to the awakening and the unfoldment of consciousness and of that growing awareness which distinguishes every form throughout the manifested, 63. world. Every form has its own area of awareness, and evolution is the process whereby forms respond to contact, react to impact, and pass on to greater development, usefulness and effectiveness. The law of evolution and the science of impression cover the unfoldment of consciousness and bring about adaptability to the immanent soul. Modern science, through its work in the fields of psychology and medicine, to mention only two, and its experiments with forms which have established the modes of constructing and bringing into being the varying mechanisms of contact found in the different kingdoms of nature, has mastered much of the evolutionary development of the exoteric response apparatus. With all this we shall not attempt to deal, it is correct as far as it goes. We shall confine ourselves to a consideration of the contacts and impacts which confront the disciples and initiates of the world today, as they work in the hierarchy and through an ashram, and whose path of advance is as a shining light which shineth evermore until full enlightenment has been achieved. 64. Sequential revelation of relationships. I would like to refer you back to page 52 where I outlined this extraordinary science which is, inherently in itself, the evidence of evolution, of the essential dualism in manifestation, and the testimony, unalterable and incontrovertible, to the unfoldment of consciousness. At the same time, it proceeds upon the basic premise that the various phases of consciousness which are steadily and sequentially revealed in time and space are, from the point of view of the eternal now, the sum total of the states of consciousness of the One in whom we live and move and have our being. All these phases of conscious acceptance of existent phenomena and their related reactions are, to Sanat Kumara, what a day's experience and reactions or the current life experiences are to the intelligent man, only vastly more enveloping and comprehensive. There were a number of points to which I did not refer then, but which I would like to take up now in the interests of clarity and understanding. I have called this science of rapport and of reaction, the supreme science of contact. That is essentially what it is. The reaction to this contact, whether cosmic as in the case of Sanat Kumara, or planetary as in the case of the members of the hierarchy, is nevertheless limited and circumscribed, from the point of view of the informed aspirant, is responsible for the creation of karma or the setting in motion of causes which must unalterably have their effects, these effects being negated and rendered useless, or innocuous, if you prefer that word, when the entity concerned brings to the engendered circumstances the needed intelligence. Wisdom, 65. Intuition or will. Ponder on this. Consciousness is inherent in all forms of life. That is an occult platitude. It is an innate potency which forever accompanies life in manifestation. These two, related through manifestation, are in reality Atma Buddhi, spirit reason, dedicated for the term of the creative period to a simultaneous functioning. The first result of their relation is the appearance of that which will enable the Lord of the world to express his own unknown inscrutable purpose. During the cycle of manifestation, this combination of life awareness, spirit reason, Atma Buddhi, is the product of the multiplicity in unity of which we hear so much. Demonstrating as activity, quality, ideology, rationality, relationship, unity, and many other expressions of the divine nature. In the earlier part of a treatise on the seven rays, I spoke of life, quality and appearance, mentioning the major triplicity which could be and is already proven and apparent to man. Quality was emphasized as the second aspect, not because on all planes and for all time that is so, but because at the present point in human evolution, quality plus activity appear to be the two lower aspects of divine manifestation. Already, however, two others are, if anything, superseding them in the consciousness of thinking humanity, relationship and ideas. Still others will be rapidly added as the consciousness of man is more effectively employed. The science of contact will not only reveal quality, but is revealing the lines of relationship which underlie all manifestation and of which the etheric body is the symbol. It is also rendering man sensitive to ideas as the unfolding intellect of man permits it. The reaction of humanity to these two revelations, which come, if you could but realize it, as the result, the reward, of contact and of the impact of life reason upon that manifestation which has always been present though unrealized, will bring about vast, 66, changes and more far-reaching results than has the reaction to quality. Curiously enough, the discovery of quality as the second aspect in manifestation, later to be superseded, called for, and developed, the critical faculty in man. This critical faculty, so destructive in its present use, will be correctly expressed when the nature of relationship is better grasped and the true function of ideas is properly understood. This supreme science of contact governs all reactions to impact. This statement includes the cosmic reactions of Sanat Kumara down to the scarcely discernible reactions, invisible almost even to the eye of the seer, of the infinitesimal atom. For the sake of clarity, I divided this science into three major divisions, basing them upon the reactions of the three major planetary centers to their environment. This is a point which I would have you carefully bear in mind. I could write a treatise longer than this one purely on the creation of the response apparatus which each of these three centers of divine life reason had to form in order to make the needed contact and to interpret correctly. There are many paradoxes in what I am here giving you, and apparently some contradictions where orthodox occultism is concerned, but that is ever the case as the teaching expands in content and the earlier all-inclusive facts are seen to be minor aspects of still greater facts. You can see, therefore, the significance and the importance of the dictum in the secret doctrine that the hierarchy and all in the council chamber of Sanat Kumara, or Shambhala, have invariably passed through the human stage of evolution, for only human beings can perfectly blend and express life reason, and only human intellect can consciously create what is needed in order to bring the needed stages of manifested life into being. 67. Here again emerges another reason for the importance of the center which we call the race of men. Upon the shoulders of humanity rests unbelievable responsibility. Therefore, whether we are dealing with simple telepathy, or with invocation and evocation, or with impression, we are in reality considering the effect of life reason as it manifests in relation to the available and suitable environment. Note this phrase. All this takes place through men in process of being made perfect, through men who have attained a relative perfection, and through men who, in the majority of cases, arrived at perfection elsewhere than in this present manifesting cycle. This should indicate to you the potentiality hidden in the very lowest of the human family, and the future of wonder and of usefulness which lies ahead for each and all in due time and after due effort. Technically speaking, it is the hierarchy which is impressed from Shambhala, and humanity which is reached by the hierarchy via the method of invocation and evocation. Within the human family two things occur as the result of this received and recognized activity of a phase of the science of contact. 1. Telepathic relationship is set up. This, my brother, has ever existed between members of the human family and, as previously explained, is of two kinds: solar plexus telepathy, instinctual, uncontrolled, widely prevalent and allied to many of the surprising activities of forms of life other than the human, i.e., the instinct of the homing pigeon or the method whereby cats and dogs and horses will find their homes over immense distances. The telepathic interplay between a mother and her children is instinctual and seated in the animal nature. Mental telepathy is now being recognized and studied. This is the activity and rapport established from mind to mind. It also includes the telepathic response to current, 68, thought forms and thought conditions in the world today. Interest in this is already very great. 2. Intuitional telepathy begins to manifest increasingly among advanced human beings in all lands and all races. This indicates soul contact and the consequent awakening of group consciousness, for sensitivity to intuitional impressions has to do only with group concerns. This science of contact governs relations within our entire planetary life and includes, for instance, the rapport being established between humanity and the domesticated animals. These animals are to their own kingdom what the new group of world servers is to humanity. The new group of world servers is the linking bridge and the mode of communication between the hierarchy, the fifth kingdom, and humanity, the fourth kingdom, under the present divine plan. The domesticated animals fulfill, therefore, an analogous function between humanity, the fourth kingdom, and the animal kingdom, the third. These analogies are often fertile fields of illumination. As regards Shambhala, the impression there received is not the result of invocation which in due course evokes extra-planetary response, as is the case between the hierarchy and Shambhala, and the hierarchy and humanity, with certain changes during the process of stepping down or of descent. As regards Shambhala, the impression there received is not the result of invocation which in due course evokes extra-planetary response, as is the case between the hierarchy and Shambhala, and the hierarchy and humanity, with certain changes during the process of stepping down or of descent. That which impresses Shambhala and is received by the Grand Council of the Lord of the World, comes via Sanat Kumara because he is in close contact with other planetary logoi or groups of planetary logoi, wielding a united, focused, intelligent will. It is Sanat Kumara whose task it is to impress the lives who meet periodically in the council chamber with the next phase of unfolding purpose. This purpose is later, occultly reduced, or stepped down until it emerges as the hierarchical plan. This plan is contingent upon immanence, Atmic realization, 69, and pure reason, as the hierarchy has termed these three aspects of reaction, to impression from Shambhala. Let me make myself clear. The hierarchy is no group of mystical workers. Only those aspects of divine purpose which can be immediately grasped and developed and which are patently valuable to humanity, when presented in right form by the hierarchy, are registered by them. They know what consciously to repudiate, as it is occultly called, and they act ever in response to a law of immanence or of occult prevision which is almost unrecognizable and indefinable by advanced humanity. The words Atmic realization are most interesting, for they refer to the quality and the mass of will energy which could be made available by the pledged and unified hierarchy to carry out the immanent plan. Never forget that in considering Shambhala and the plan, we are thinking entirely within the limits of the expression of the will aspect of the Lord of the World, and this, except for advanced initiates, is well nigh impossible. This factor has to be accepted theoretically, even if not yet understood. To these two unalterable requirements the hierarchy contributes the faculty of pure reason, which is the governing faculty of the hierarchy and which brings into activity the quality to which man has erroneously given the name of love. This emphasizes the sentimental aspect and signifies to the majority, very largely, simply the sentimental and emotional aspect, which is entirely of an astral nature. Pure reason, which is the supreme characteristic of the members of the hierarchy, will ever express itself in right action and right human relations, and that will manifest, when present, what love in reality is. Pure love is a quality or effect of pure reason. The pure reason of the hierarchical response is needed for the grasping and the comprehension of the purpose as 70. It works out through the plan sponsored at any one time by the hierarchy, and the quality of pure love is needed and demanded, even if unrealized, by awaiting humanity. This impression, emanating from Shambhala, takes the form of a focused emanation which employs the higher aspect of the Antakarana as its channel of contact. I refer not here to the thread as built by the disciple between the mental unit and the abstract mind. I refer to its continuation through the Buddhic and Atmic levels of consciousness into the area of magnetized consciousness. I use this word as we have not yet the necessary word to express the exact nature of this higher awareness, and the term identification seems somewhat unsuitable, which surrounds and protects the true Shambhala center. It is essential that you here bear in mind that just as the mass of men do not know, recognize or respond to the hierarchy, so, within the hierarchy itself, you have a group analogous to this mass of men. There are many lesser members of the hierarchy and many, very many, disciples who do not know, recognize or as yet respond to the influence or the potency of Shambhala. Within the hierarchy, the the science of impression conditions the relation between senior and junior members in the various ashrams. All do not respond in the same way, for in its higher aspects it is a science in process of mastering. It might be said, in order that you may understand more easily, that impression governs and conditions all those within the hierarchy whose abstract mind is highly developed. It is not fully developed in the case of many disciples in the ashram, and hence only certain members of the hierarchy, the masters, the adepts and initiates of the third degree, are permitted to know the details of the plan. These are protected by means of this very science, 71, of impression. The remaining members of the hierarchy take their orders from their seniors. I would ask you to remember that, in our planetary development, the emphasis of the entire evolutionary process is on the mind and on the various aspects of the mind, intelligence, mental perception, the son of mind, the lower mind, the abstract mind, the mind as will, the universal mind. The three which are of major importance and which form an esoteric triangle requiring to be brought into a vital interrelation are the son of mind, the abstract mind, and the universal mind. They are, when fully related and active, the factors which engineer divine purpose and step it down into such form that we call it the hierarchical plan and can act upon it. Only when the initiate has attained, through monadic contact, a touch of the universal mind can the purpose be sensed by him. This involves also the development of the abstract mind, plus the residue of mental perception which the son of mind, the soul, has bequeathed to him. Through all this unfoldment he can join the group who are the formulators of the plan. We are dealing here with most difficult and complex matters, inherent in the initiate consciousness and for which we have as yet no correct terminology. Also, the average aspirant has no idea what is the nature of the awareness or the reactions to contact of those who have passed beyond the third initiation. These limitations of the average student must constantly be borne in mind. The science of invocation and evocation, which embodies the technique of interplay within the hierarchy itself, to a certain degree between Shambhala and the hierarchy, and to an increasing extent between humanity and the hierarchy, is based entirely on a sense of relation. Therefore only a certain level of conscious lives can invoke Shambhala and evoke response, and this because they, 72, have themselves developed some of the aspects of that type of mental understanding which is the hierarchical expression of the universal mind. The light and futile talk of certain writers and thinkers anent the cosmic consciousness, and their flippant use of such phrases as, tuning in with the infinite, or, tapping the universal mind, serve only to show how very little is known in reality about the responses and the reactions of those of high initiate rank or of those on the highest levels of hierarchical life. True capacity to invoke and evoke, within initiate ranks, is based upon a mysterious development, impossible before the time of the third initiation, of the esoteric sense. The active use of the esoteric sense in the occult training offered to aspirants, disciples and initiates of lesser degree produces certain changes within the brain, with corresponding changes within the Buddhic vehicle. These changes enable one at will, after the third initiation of transfiguration, to contact the being, life, or the monadic point of contact with whom he will be increasingly affiliated, or the member of the hierarchy whom he may desire to consult. It does not involve the use of speech or words but is simply a technical method whereby an initiate within the hierarchy or en rapport with Shambhala can make his presence felt and certain ideas can be presented by him. Upon this I will not further enlarge. For average humanity, the development of the intuition is the lower correspondence to this type of esoteric sense employed by initiates of high degree, or this mode of perceptive intercourse, as it is sometimes called. Within the ashrams, advanced disciples are taught how to discover within themselves and to use this new potency and thus develop the needed mechanism. They can know simultaneously both the demand and the answer or response which their invocation application has evoked. All disciples who, 73, have taken the third initiation have the power to invoke and to be evoked, and hence this technique is not permitted to those of lower status. A highly developed discriminative faculty is here needed. It is in reality an advanced part of the technique whereby, in the earliest stages, the disciple is permitted to attract the attention of the master. This he does through the very importunity of his desire. Later, through the use of his acquired knowledge, he proceeds to what is called the regulated nature of his appeal. The appeal is then less regulated by desire and more under the control of will. I am not here dealing with invocation and evocation as it is carried on between humanity and the hierarchy. I gave much along this line when I made public the various invocations whereby I have been attempting to substitute the invocative method for the selfish use of prayer and the limiting mode of the average meditation process. It is a slow process by means of which this method of intercourse must be learnt and mastered, and no textbook or information on the subject is of much use. Nor am I going to deal with the ordinary telepathy prevalent among men and natural to so many, as this has been dealt with earlier in this book. But at this point I should like to emphasize something which applies to every human being. When Animal Man passed through the door of individualization and became a human being, he came possessed of an innate potency of sight. For eons he has seen in the three worlds, and many have for several lives sought after the vision which stabilizes the aspirant upon the path. Through the door of initiation, having attained the mystical vision, each aspirant will become aware of that within himself which permits of a spiritual perception of such an expansive nature that he gets his first real and individual glimpse of the divine plan. From that moment his entire life is altered. I cannot expect the student to understand. If he thinks he does, he is being misled by words. He will pass through the door of identification. This is a perfectly meaningless phrase, since its significance is most carefully guarded. Symbolically speaking, and in order to preserve the concept of this door in the mind of humanity, true esoteric meanings are entered on the password. Only the word can enter through this door, this highest and widest of all doors. Once through that door and once eligible to the council chamber of the Great Lord, the initiate will comprehend what is meant by monadic impression. It is not impression by a monad, that meaningless term, upon the brain of a man who has constructed the Antikarana and passed the fourth initiation. It is an innate responsiveness to the purpose of the universal mind of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. 75. 11. Results of contact and receptivity. I am not indicating in any way how an individual can become telepathic. All those developments within the area or region of progressive contacts are only useful and truly available when they are developed normally and naturally and are not the result of premature unfoldment. When the development is premature, there is always the danger of wrong, erroneous and self-centered interpretations. The telepathic information can be of purely selfish or personal import, and that type of telepathy has no place in what I am seeking to impart. People today frequently evidence a telepathic tendency or capacity. They tune in, a phrase they regard as more euphonious than the words, telepathic rapport, with something or someone, though they know not what it is. Everything that they purport to register is regarded by them as of major importance. It is usually self-related and not due to their high point of spiritual unfoldment which warrants their being the custodians of mysterious spiritual messages, usually of a most unimportant and platitudinous nature. There are many sources of these messages, and it might be useful if I here mention some of them. What I have to say may prove to be of value to the general occult public. 1. Messages emanating from the relatively nice, well-trained subconscious nature of the recipient. These well up from the subconscious but are regarded by the recipient as coming from an outside source. Introspective people frequently penetrate into the layer of subconscious recollection and are quite unaware of so doing. Their interest in themselves is so intense. Not knowing that they have done this, 76, they regard what they find as unusual, beautiful and important, and then proceed to formulate it into messages, which they expect their friends and the general public to regard as spiritually based. These messages are normally innocuous, sometimes beautiful, because they are a mixture of what the recipients have read and gathered from the mystical writing or have heard from Christian sources and the Bible. It is really the content of their right thinking along spiritual lines and can do no one any harm, but is of no true importance whatsoever. It accounts, however, for 85% of the so-called telepathic or inspired writings so prevalent at this time. 2. Impressions from the soul, which are translated into concepts and written down by the personality. The recipient is deeply impressed by the relatively high vibration which accompanies them, forgetting that the vibration of the soul is that of a master, for the soul is a master on its own plane. These are true soul impressions but usually have in them nothing new or of major importance. They are, again, the result of past ages of soul development. As far as the personality is concerned, they are, therefore, that which an awakening personality has contributed to the soul of the good, the true and the beautiful, plus that which has entered into the personality consciousness as a result of soul contact. This accounts for 8% of the writings and communications put before the general public by aspirants today. 3. Teachings given by a senior or more advanced disciple on the inner planes to a disciple under training or who has just been admitted into an ashram. These teachings bear the impress and conclusions of the senior disciple and are frequently of value. They may, and often do, contain information of which the recipient is totally unaware. The criterion here is that nothing, literally nothing, will concern 77. The recipient, either spiritually or mentally or in any other way connected with his personality, nor will they contain the platitudes of the religious background of the recipient. They will account for 5% of the teaching given, but this is in relation to the entire world and the percentage does not refer to some one occult group, one religious faith or one nation. The recognition of this is of vital importance. 4. Communications from a master to his disciple. This accounts for 2% of the entire telepathic receptivity, demonstrated by humanity as a whole throughout the entire world. Western students would here do well to remember that the subjective Eastern student is far more prone to telepathic receptivity than is his Western brother. This has a definite bearing on all the above classifications, which is somewhat humiliating for the Western mystic and occult student. The world scriptures emanate from another department of the second-ray teaching faculty. In this statement I do not include the Old Testament except such passages as the 23rd Psalm and certain passages out of the prophets, particularly the prophet Isaiah. The world scriptures were written for mystics, occupied with beauty, comfort, and encouragement, and were not written for occultists. I would call this to your attention. In this section of the teaching I am dealing with the nature and results of contact, of receptivity. I am giving no rules for individual development, and would not, if I could. Humanity today is developing receivers of every kind of concept, beginning with the lowest of them all, the masses of men who, through demagogues, the newspapers, the radio, books and lectures, are conditioned by many minds, according to their ray type of receptivity. As true intelligence develops and as love begins to permeate human thinking, these conditioning factors will get increasingly 78. Less attractive. This means when the soul becomes of greater life importance in man-made ideas, if such a phrase is permissible, of less importance. There are, in reality, no man-made ideas. There are only ideas as grasped by the intelligentsia and then as stepped down, by humanity's constant reaction to glamour, to emotional or astral conclusions, and to selfish interpretations. It must be remembered that the activity of all these impressing agencies is felt in a wide and general sense throughout the entire planet and the planetary aura. No kingdom in nature escapes this impact, and it is thus that the purpose of the Lord of the world is carried out. Being, coherence and activity are thus blended into one created and creative whole. Life, quality and appearance respond unitedly to the imposed intention of the planetary logos and yet, at the same time, remain creatively free as regards their reaction to these contacted impressions. This reaction is necessarily dependent upon the type and quality of the mechanism which registers the impression. This mechanism has been developed by the life within the form throughout the creative period and, as far as the time element has been involved, the indwelling entity in any kingdom in nature has been free, and the time has been long or short, and the reaction to impression has been rapid or slow, according to the will of the controlling life. In the mineral kingdom, this reaction is very slow, for inertia or tamas controls the spiritual life within the mineral form. In the vegetable kingdom, it is more rapid, and under the invocative appeal of the lives in that kingdom the Deva world is invoked and greatly aids and hastens the unfoldment of the vegetable consciousness. This is one reason for its relative sinlessness and extraordinary purity. The major impression registered in the second kingdom of nature emanates from the angel worlds and from the 79 Deva hierarchy. The angels and devas are to the vegetable kingdom what the spiritual hierarchy is to humanity. This is, of course, a mystery with which you have no concern. But impressions and reactions are to be found in both these kingdoms, and upon such response depends the evolution of the indwelling consciousness. The animal kingdom has a peculiar relation to the fourth kingdom in nature, and the unfolding of the animal consciousness proceeds along lines paralleling, yet dissimilar to that of the human being who is beginning to respond to the kingdom of souls, the fifth kingdom. It is the karma and destiny of the fourth kingdom to be the impressing agent for the third. The problem is complicated, however, by the fact that the animal kingdom antedates the human and had, therefore, generated a measure of karma, both good and evil, prior to the appearance of mankind. The impressing process carried forward by humanity is modified and often negated by two factors. 1. Human ignorance and selfishness, plus inability to work consciously and intelligently with the embryonic minds within animal forms. This is true except in a very few, cases which involve the domestic animals. When humanity is itself further advanced, its intelligent impression upon the consciousness of the animal kingdom will produce planetary results. At present this is not so. It will only come when the animal kingdom, as a result of human understanding, becomes invocative. 2. The self-generated karma of the animal kingdom which is largely being worked off in its relation to mankind today. The karmic entity, holding a type of rule within the third kingdom, is a part of the planetary dweller on the threshold. You will note, therefore, the amazing planetary sequence of impression, all of it emanating from the highest possible sources, though stepped down and regulated to the receiving factors. All of it concerned to a greater or less degree, according to the quality of the mechanism of reception, with the will and purpose of Sanat Kumara. All of it, during the eons, achieving a group potency and a responding sensitivity. The main factor preventing a completely unimpeded sequence of impression from Shambhala straight down into the mineral kingdom, via all the other kingdoms, is the factor of free will, resulting in karmic responsibility. This can be either good or bad. It is interesting to note here that both the good and the bad karma produce conditions which not only have to be worked out, but that they lead to conditions which delay what we, from our limited point of view, might look upon as the liberation of the planet. The generating of good karma necessitates the living through of conditions where everything, for the man responsible or for any other form within its limitations, is good, happy, beneficent and useful. The evil karma generated in any kingdom in relation to the realm where dwelleth the planetary dweller on the threshold, stands between the cosmic door of initiation and our planetary logos. This dweller represents all the mistakes and errors due to wrong reactions, unrecognized contacts, deliberate choices made in defiance of known good, and mass movements and mass activities which are temporarily not progressive in time and space. I realize that where these facts apply to the subhuman kingdoms in nature you are not aware of what I mean, but that does not alter the law or movements which are in no way related to human evolution. In connection with the planetary logos I would like to add that in that great planetary struggle and his subsequent, 81, initiation, we are all implicated, from the atom of substance up to and including all the lives which form the council chamber of the Lord of the world. It is this titanic effort which is made by the sum total of all the living processes and entities that compose the manifestation of Sanat Kumara which is responsible for the creative evolutionary processes. It is also responsible for what we call time. With all that that concept involves of events, opportunity, the past, the present and the future, the good and the evil. The dynamic impression which emanates from Shambhala reaches forth in great cycles and cyclic waves. These are impulsed from extra-planetary sources, as demanded or invoked by the Lord of the World and his associates. They emanate in response to the acclaimed will of Sanat Kumara in the council chamber. This high spiritual and ultimate impression moves outward along the seven rays, viewing them as seven streams of spiritual energy, qualified and colored by the Shambhalic impression. This process repeats itself when hierarchical invocation is effective and successfully established. This again is repeated between the hierarchy and humanity in response to human invocation. This is becoming increasingly intelligent, potent and evocative. The problem of the human kingdom is, however, very great. Humanity is the recipient of so many impacts, so many impressions, so many telepathic and mental currents and so many qualified vibratory impressions from all the 7 kingdoms in nature that eons have elapsed in developing the adequate discriminative sensitivity and in establishing the certitude of the point in evolution from which conscious invocation must arise and upon which the evoked impression must be registered. Unconscious invocation proceeds all the time. When it becomes conscious, it becomes exceedingly powerful. The entire human family is today an amazing receiver of impressions, owing to its myriad types of susceptible mechanisms. These impressionable instruments are capable of registering tamasic impressions, coming from the subhuman kingdoms, particularly the third and the first. They record rajasic impressions coming from mental sources of all kinds. They are also, to a much less degree, responsive to sattvic or rhythmic impressions. Their response to these high impressions and their registration of truth, light and quality, coming from the highest sources is, however, growing. It is because of this that the human kingdom, the great middle kingdom whose function it is to mediate between the higher and the lower, is the subject of much divine impression, conveying the purpose of Sanat Kumara. This you know. I have taught you much along this line in a treatise on the 7 rays and also in the earlier treatise on cosmic fire. In these present instructions I am dealing with group possibilities, with groups which can be trained to record, register and be impressed by the hierarchy. Such a group can be in the position of being able to invoke the hierarchy with power if it so choose. I am again bringing these things to your attention as aspirants and disciples, but from an angle different to those in my earlier writings. The responsibility of impressionability, of telepathic registration and of invocative appeal is very great. Hence what I have written here. 83. 12. Relation of the human to the hierarchical center. True telepathic rapport is part of the supreme science of contact and has peculiar and definite reference to humanity. Many different terms might be used in the effort to convey some understanding of this subtle, subjective mode of relationship, and I have used among others the following. 1. The science of contact. 2. The science of impression. 3. The science of invocation and evocation. 4. The science of relationship. 5. The science of sensitivity. All these terms convey different aspects of the reaction of form or forms to contact, to impression, to impact, to environment, to the thought context of various minds, to ascending and descending energies, to the invocation of agents and the evocation of their response. The whole planetary system is in reality a vast interlocking, interdependent and interrelated complexity of vehicles communicating or responsive to communication. The moment that this interrelated and communicating system is studied from the angle of relationships, then the processes of evolution and the goal of the spirit of man, which is in reality the spirit of the planetary logos, become of vital and supreme importance, but are at the same time most difficult to comprehend. So immense is the theme that it is profitless for us to do more than deal with 2 factors. 84. 1. The science of impression in relation to mankind. 2. The impressing centers, as they affect the understanding of relationship. The many modes of contact between the many subhuman and superhuman forms, groupings, and kingdoms are too intricate in their nature to be grasped at this time by students, and, which is more important, the information would be of small use to them. We will, therefore, confine ourselves to the science of impression and the science of invocation and evocation only in so far as they affect humanity. These, from the human angle, cover reception of impression and of ideas, and expressions of the consequences of sensitivity at this time and in this particular cycle. We are to consider, therefore, the relation of the human center to the hierarchical center and the growing responsiveness of humanity to the center where the will of God is known. As I said before, it is not my intention to give here the rules governing telepathic intercourse. Such intercourse is found between man and groups and groups. The relationship is slowly and normally developed and requires no hastening. It is developing as the other senses of man and his apparatus of perception have developed. Humanity is, however, outstripping telepathic development in the rapid responsiveness of entire groups, and of human beings en masse, to group impression and to group impartation of ideas. The sudden response of groups and nations to mass ideologies has been both unexpected and difficult to handle wisely and constructively. It was not anticipated by either Shambhala or the hierarchy that mass impression would develop more quickly than that of individual sensitivity, but it has happened that way. The individual within a group and working within a group is far, 85, more correctly sensitive than is the man struggling alone to render himself sensitive to impression. One of the factors militating against personal telepathic development lies in the fact that the strong, potent and modern ascension of the spirit in man, as a whole, frequently offsets personality reactions, and telepathy is a personality matter depending upon contact between mind and mind. The moment, however, that man tries to be telepathic, he is immediately swept into a vortex of abstract energies which condition him for spiritual impression far more than they fit him for personal relationships telepathically established. This surprising development freed the supervising masters for some of their plans and led them to abandon the training of individual disciples in telepathic rapport and to recognize the opportunity to train and develop invocative groups. Instead of working in lower mental substance with picked aspirants, they changed the medium of contact to that of the soul and launched the relatively new science of invocation and evocation. The lower mind then became simply an interpreter of impressions with the emphasis upon the group mind, the group purpose and the group will. This developing system of trained invocatives made the mind a positive acting factor and tuned out all tendency to negativity. This hierarchical decision then necessarily led to the instituting of the processes of group initiation, thus shifting the area of training and the whole of the teaching process and of preparation for initiation onto higher levels. The experiment of giving mankind the great invocation was tried and is proving successful, though much yet remains to be done. It might be said, therefore, that the four requirements which are needed to aid the disciple to meet the demands of 86. The initiatory process are, the ability to be impressed, the capacity accurately to register the impression, the power to record what has been given, and then to give it word forms in the mind consciousness. On the basis of the information received, the disciple must then properly invoke the needed energies and learn through experience to produce a responsive evocation. My earlier statement on this subject a few pages back was intended to lead up to this teaching and I repeat it here. The entire human family is today an amazing receiver of impressions, owing to the myriad types of susceptible mechanisms. It is because of this that the human kingdom, the great middle kingdom whose function it is to mediate between the higher and the lower, is the subject of so much divine impression, conveying the purpose of Sanat Kumara. In these present instructions I am dealing with group possibilities, with groups which can be trained to record, register and be impressed by the hierarchy. Such a group can be in the position of being able to invoke the hierarchy with power if it so choose. I am again bringing these things to your attention as aspirants and disciples, but from an angle different to those in my earlier writings. The responsibility of impressionability, of telepathic registration and of invocative appeal is very great. For the aspirant and particularly for the conscious disciple, the impression to be considered comes from four sources. 1. From the disciple's own soul. 2. From the ashram with which he is to be affiliated. 3. Directly from the master. 4. From the spiritual triad, via the Antakarana. 87. The first two stages cover the period of the first two initiations. The third precedes the third initiation and persists until the disciple is himself a master. The fourth type of informative impression can be registered after the third initiation and reach the disciple in the ashram. He then has the task himself of impressing his mind with what he has been told and known within the ashram. Eventually, as a master of an ashram, he starts upon one of the major hierarchical tasks of mastering the science of impression. There are therefore two aspects to this work of impression. One deals with the capacity to be impressed. The other with the ability to be an impressing agent. The disciple is not permitted to practice the art of impressing until he himself is among those who receive triadal impression and therefore impression from Shambhala, within the protective area or aura of the ashram with which he is affiliated. It must be remembered that this science of impression is in reality the science of thought form making, thought form vitalization and thought form direction, and only a disciple who has passed through the processes of transfiguration and is no longer the victim of his own personality can be entrusted with so dangerous a cycle of powers. As long as there exists any desire for selfish power, for unspiritual control and for influence over the minds of other human beings or over groups, the disciple cannot be trusted, under the hierarchical rules, with the deliberate creation of thought forms designed to produce specific effects, and with their dispersal to men and groups. After he has passed the tests of the transfiguration initiation he may do so. The science of impression is the bedrock or the foundation for the practice of telepathy. If a major world test were to be made, those receptive to impression would be found to fall into two groups, 88. 1. Those possessing unconscious receptivity to telepathic impression. They at present constitute a majority wherein the impression is received via the solar plexus, and the thought forms thus generated are dispatched from the throat center of the one who is the impressing agent. 2. Those who are developing or have developed a conscious receptivity wherein the impression is, first of all, received by the mind and then imparted to and registered by the brain. The one who is the impressing agent in this case works via the center between the eyebrows, the ajna center. The first group of recipients are purely personality grounded or focused. In some cases they are only physically aware of the life processes and of some contact which remains for them unrecognized and unchecked or uncontrolled in any way. Under this group we must, therefore, class all mediumistic phenomena, even those of the highest astral or spiritual nature, plus the messages received from the usually beautiful subconscious of the average person upon the probationary path. Messages from the disciple's own soul are intermediate between those mediumistic expressions and those which are definitely mental in nature. With this last mentioned type of communication, there will be found mixed certain messages or impressions from the ashram which the disciple will be apt to confuse with group telepathy, soul communication and direct relation with the master, a relationship at this stage non-existent. This will not greatly matter, because when the disciple begins to realize certain differences, a new type of registration will awaken and guide the disciple's consciousness. This stage, which embraces the second type of impression in its earliest forms, can be quite a long one, for it, 89, covers a very definite period of transition from the astral plane to the mental plane. The time equation varies according to ray and the age of the soul. Sixth ray people, for instance, are very slow in making this transition, owing to the pronounced factor of glamour. First and second ray people are relatively quick. Third ray people are also slow, for they are lost in the threads of their own glamorous manipulations and their devious thinking, and hardly know where truth begins and delusion ends. Illusion, which is the problem of the mental types on all rays, is far more temporary in its effects than is delusion. When the disciple has mastered to some degree the significant difference between messages from his own subconscious or the subconscious of other people with whom he may be en rapport, and the messages coming from his own soul, his life then becomes more self-directed and organized, more fruitful from the angle of service, and therefore of definite use to the hierarchy. He learns to distinguish the messages coming from his own soul from those which are hierarchical. His life becomes more clearly directed. He next distinguishes definitely and accurately the communications which come to him from the ashram and which are sent out to make impression upon the minds of aspirants and disciples of all degrees and of all ray types. When he can distinguish between these various communications, then and only then does the third type of communication become possible: direct messages which are due to contact with the master of his ashram in person. He, by that time, possesses what has been called the freedom of the ashram, and the keys to the kingdom of God. He can then be trusted with some of the directive potency of the ashram itself. His thinking will then affect and reach others. This developing effectiveness grows with rapidity when the fourth type of impression is familiar to the 90 disciple, that coming from the spiritual triad, and therefore from the monad and Shambhala. There are consequently, to this final stage of impression, three lesser though definite states, each marking an expansion in the realm of service and each related to the last three initiations of the total possible 9 initiations which confront developing humanity. The sixth initiation, in which only masters can participate, marks a transition from the first three stages of impressibility required by the disciples as preludes to the fifth initiation, or in reality to the third, fourth and fifth, and are related to the three stages of triadal communication, each of which is related to the seventh, the eighth and the ninth initiations. Never does the geometrical pattern, the numerical progression or the law of correspondences break down in the understanding of the purpose and the plans of the planetary logos, established before the worlds were created and finding their prototypes upon the cosmic mental planes. These points are peculiarly difficult for men to grasp at this time wherein their state of consciousness is concentratedly individualized. Nevertheless, there is on man's part a steadily growing responsiveness to an expanding environment, as for instance man's recognition of the distinction between nationalism and internationalism. This responsiveness is naturally conditioned by human free will, effective peculiarly in the timing process. He may learn rapidly and fast or he may go the slow way, but his state of consciousness remains one of a developing reaction to his environment, as registered by his consciousness, and in which he, stage by stage, becomes an integral factor. This integration into his environment, his absorption of its atmosphere and his potency in progression are all related to the fact that he is created to receive impression and that he possesses a mechanism of response to all. 91. The facets of the divine expression in manifestation. It is for that reason that the truly illumined man and all who have taken the three highest initiations are always referred to as the diamond-souled. They, in their totality constitute the jewel in the lotus, that 12-petaled lotus which is the symbol and expression of the potency of the planetary logos. You can see, therefore, how the theme of revelation runs throughout the entire evolutionary process. It must never be forgotten that step by step, stage by stage, expansion after expansion, initiation after initiation, the divine whole is realized by man. The method is impressed from a hitherto unrecognized environment. This only becomes possible in this particular form when the sons of mind who are the sons of God and whose nature is at one with his began to move on earth. The science of impression is in reality the technique whereby humanity has been taught by the spiritual hierarchy from the moment of its first appearance upon earth. It is the technique which all disciples have to learn, no matter which of the 7 paths they may eventually choose, and it is also the sublime art which every master practices on inspiration from Shambhala. It is a technique which is implemented by the will, and its consummation is the complete assimilation of the little wills of men into the divine purpose. It is the acceptance on their part of the promotion of that purpose through right impression on all forms of life at any particular point of evolution. Disciples then become agents of the divine will and are entrusted with the direction of energies, with the plan and with the secrets and the inspiration which are hidden in the mind of God. To that knowledge, germinated and formed in the solar system previous to this, they add that which the present solar system has to give and to mature, the 92. Magnetic attractiveness of the second ray of love wisdom in one of its 3 major forms or rays of aspect, implemented by the 4 rays of attribute. This power to use the ray energies to attract and impress the constantly expanding revelation is the clue to all the work going forward today, and to this activity we give the name of the science of impression. It involves the constant opening up of a new environment. An environment which reaches all the way from the lowest grade of daily living, undertaken by the least developed of human beings, to that point upon the ladder of evolution when the aspirant becomes consciously susceptible to what we call spiritual impression. At that point he becomes capable of being more sensitive to a higher range of impression and, at the same time, he himself begins to learn the art of impressing the minds of others, to master the understanding of the level from which he works as an impressing agent, and to know who are the sons of men he can impress. He has to master also the secondary lesson of adapting his environment in such a manner that he can impress others and the impression can find its way through his environing circumstances and into the usually inattentive minds for whom he feels a responsibility. This he does through a growing knowledge of himself and through learning the art of registering. The clearer and the more deeply apprehending is his capacity to register the impression to which he is subjected and to which he is sensitive, the more easily will he reach those he must aid towards a wider and deeper insight. This registering of his own expanding environment, with all its implications of a new vision, a new goal, a wider field of service, leads to the inflowing energies, arriving on the wings of inspiration, becoming a reservoir of thought substance, to the use of which he must accustom himself. 93. The first step then is the fact of recording and of reducing into correct and available concepts, ideas and thought forms, that which he has registered. This marks the first stage in his truly occult service, and to this new type of service he will be increasingly dedicated. From the reservoir of thought substance he learns to project those forms, those magnetic ideas, which will invoke the attention of those he seeks to help. This is called the stage of resultant invocation. It is an invocative act, an invocative way of living, which will find its way into the minds of men, and which will call forth or evoke from them a response and a widening consciousness. The processes of spiritual impression are thereby set up. It is also an invocation, on the part of the disciple, for further and greater impression and inspiration in order to increase his ability to serve. 13. Telepathic sensitivity, a normal unfoldment. You will have noticed that I have given no instructions as to the art of developing telepathic sensitivity. The reason is, as I told you before, that this sensitivity should be, and always is, a normal unfoldment when the disciple is correctly oriented, completely dedicated and learning decentralization. If it is a forced process, then the sensitivity developed is not normal and carries with it much difficulty and future danger. Where the disciple is concerned, release from the constant consideration of personal circumstances and problems leads inevitably to a clear mental release. This then provides those areas of free mental perception which make the higher sensitivity possible. Gradually, as the disciple acquires true freedom of thought and the power to be receptive to the impression of the abstract mind, he creates for himself a reservoir of thought which becomes available at need for the helping of other people and for the necessities of his growing world service. Later, he becomes sensitive to impression from the hierarchy. This is at first purely ashramic, but is later transformed into total hierarchical impression by the time the disciple is a master. The plan is then the dynamic substance providing the content of the reservoir of thought upon which he can draw. This is a statement of unique and unusual importance. Later still, he becomes sensitive to impression from Shambhala, and the quality of the will which implements planetary purpose is added to the content of his available knowledge. The point which I seek to make here, however, is the fact of the existence of a growing reservoir of thought which the disciple has created in response to the many, 95, varying impressions to which he is becoming increasingly sensitive. The ideas, concepts and spiritual objectives of which he is becoming aware are steadily being formulated by him into thoughts with their appropriated thought forms, and upon these he learns to draw as he seeks to serve his fellowmen. He finds himself in possession of a reservoir or pool of thought substance which is the result of his own mental activity, of his innate receptivity, and which provides the material for teaching and the fountain of knowledge, upon which he can draw when he seeks to aid other people. The essential point to be grasped is that sensitivity to impression is a normal and natural unfoldment, paralleling spiritual development. I gave you a clue to the entire process when I said that sensitivity to impression involves the engendering of a magnetic aura upon which the highest impressions can play. I would have you give the deepest consideration to these words. As the disciple begins to demonstrate soul quality, and the second divine aspect takes possession of him and controls and colors his entire life, automatically the higher sensitivity is developed. He becomes a magnet for spiritual ideas and concepts. He attracts into his field of consciousness the outline, and later the details, of the hierarchical plan. He becomes aware eventually of the planetary purpose. All these impressions are not things which he must seek out and learn laboriously to ascertain, to hold and seize upon. They drop into his field of consciousness because he has created a magnetic aura which invokes them and brings them into his mind. This magnetic aura begins to form itself from the first moment he makes a contact with his soul. It deepens and grows as those contacts increase in frequency and become eventually an habitual state of 96 consciousness. Then, at will and at all times, he is en rapport with his soul, the second divine aspect. It is this aura which is in reality the reservoir of thought substance upon which he can spiritually rely. His point of focus is upon the mental plane. He is no longer controlled by the astral nature. He is successfully constructing the antikarana along which the higher impressions can flow. He learns not to dissipate this inflow but to accumulate within the aura, with which he has surrounded himself, the knowledge and the wisdom which he realizes his service to his fellowmen requires. A disciple is a magnetic center of light and knowledge just in so far as the magnetic aura is held by him in a state of receptivity. It is then constantly invocative of the higher range of impressions. It can be evoked and set into distributing activity by that which is lower and which is demanding aid. The disciple therefore, in due time, becomes a tiny or minute correspondence of the hierarchy, invocative as it is to Shambhala and easily evoked by human demand. These are points warranting careful consideration. They involve a primary recognition of points of tension and their consequent expansion into magnetic auras or areas, capable of invocation and evocation. These areas of sensitivity pass through 3 stages, upon which it is not my intention to enlarge. 1. Sensitivity to impression from other human beings. This sensitivity becomes of use in service when the needed magnetic aura has been engendered and is brought under scientific control. 2. Sensitivity to group impression. The passage of ideas from group to group. The disciple can become a receptive agent within any group of which he is a part, and this ability indicates progress in his part. 97. 3. Sensitivity to hierarchical impressions, reaching the disciple via the antikarana and, later, from the hierarchy as a whole, when he has attained some of the higher initiations. This indicates ability to register impression from Shambhala. It would be of value if we now considered 3 points which are concerned with sensitivity to impression, with the construction of the resultant reservoir of thought, and with responsiveness to subsequent invocative appeals. These 3 points are: 1. Processes of registration. 2. Processes of recording interpretations. 3. Processes of resultant invocative response. I would recall to your minds the knowledge that the aura which each of you has created around the central nucleus of your incarnated self or soul is a fragment of the overshadowing soul which brought you into manifestation. This aura is, as you well know, composed of the emanations of the etheric body, and this in its turn embodies 3 types of energy for which you are individually responsible. These 3 types are, when added to the energy of prana which composes the etheric vehicles. 1. The health aura. This is essentially physical. 2. The astral aura, which is usually by far the most dominant factor, extensive and controlling. 3. The mental aura, which is in most cases relatively small but which develops rapidly once the disciple takes his own development consciously in hand, or once the polarization of the personality is upon the mental plane. The time will eventually come when 98 the mental aura will obliterate, if I may use such an inadequate term, the emotional or astral aura, and then the soul quality of love will create a substitute, so that the needed sensitivity does not entirely disappear but is of a higher and far more acute nature. In this threefold aura, or more correctly, fourfold, if you count the etheric vehicle, every individual lives and moves and has his being. It is this living, vital aura which is the recording agent of all impressions, both objective and subjective. It is this agent of sensitive response, which the indwelling self has to control and use in order to register impression or to direct etheric or mental impression out into the world of men. Astral impression is purely selfish and individual and, though it may affect a man's surroundings, is not directed as are the other energies registered. It is the aura which predominantly creates the effects which a person has upon his associates. It is not primarily his words which produce reactions even though they are supposed to embody his reactions and his thinking but which are, in reality, usually expressions of his emotional desires. All of us, therefore, carry around with us a subjective mechanism which is a true and perfect picture of our peculiar point in evolution. It is the aura which a master watches, and this is a factor of major importance in the life of the disciple. The light of the soul within the aura and the condition of the various aspects of the aura indicate whether or not the disciple is nearing the path of discipleship. As the emotional reactions lessen, and as the mental apparatus clarifies, the progress of the aspirant can be exactly noted. I would have you distinguish carefully between the astral and the mental bodies and that which they emanate. The bodies, so-called, are substantial in nature. The aura is essentially radiatory and extends from each. 99. Substantial vehicle in every direction. This is a point which should be most carefully noted. The problem of the aspirant as he engenders his magnetic aura is himself to withdraw, and thus lessen the extent and the power of the astral aura, and extend and increase the potency of the mental aura. It should be remembered that the large majority of aspirants are definitely polarized in the astral nature, and that therefore their problem is to achieve a different polarization and to become focused upon the mental plane. This takes time and vast effort. Eventually, as mentioned above, the radiation of the soul is substituted in place of the hitherto present emotional activity of the aspirant. This emanation is, in reality, a radiation from the love petals of the egoic lotus. The moment an aspirant begins to work consciously at his own unfoldment and to consider and deal with the aura with which he is equipped, he then passes through 3 stages during his progress upon the path of return. These are: 1. The stage wherein he discovers the potency and the quality of his astral aura. Owing to the fact that this is, in the second solar system, the quality of love and its distortion into the astral nature, the development of emotional sensitivity is peculiarly and almost unnaturally strong. It is stronger than the mental body and its mental direction. 2. The stage wherein the mental vehicle increases its potency and produces, finally, a mental radiation which is so strong that it dominates and controls the astral aura. 3. The stage wherein the soul expresses its essential nature of love and begins to pour its radiation into the astral aura, via the astral body. Eventually the 100 sensitivity of love is substituted for emotional sensitivity and desire. Aspirants are to be found at all these 3 stages of sensitivity. There comes a moment during the second initiation when the soul of the initiate sweeps into activity and fundamental force, if I might use such a term, submerges the astral nature, vitalizing and inspiring the astral body, changing temporarily the quality of the astral aura, and establishing a control which will lead finally to the substitution which I have mentioned above. This is an aspect of the truth which underlies the doctrine of vicarious at one ment, a doctrine which has been woefully distorted by Christian theology. Let us now deal with the aforementioned processes of registration, of recording interpretations, and the resultant invocative response. We must bear in mind always that I am stating general rules and that I am not dealing either with the ideal or with the undesirable. The sources of impression change as the disciple makes progress, though always the larger and the greater source will include all lesser sources. The fact that a man is sensitive to hierarchical impression in his mental aura will not prevent his being sensitive in his astral nature to the invocative and emotional call of human beings. The two together are most useful in effect, if the disciple sees to it that they are related. Forget this not, brother of mine. The capacity to interpret recorded impressions is likewise learned as the mental aura develops under the influence of the mind held steady in the light of the soul. The disciple learns that all recorded truth is susceptible to many interpretations, and that these unfold with increasing clarity as he takes one initiation after another, and as he develops conscious responsiveness. The ability to invoke demonstrates from life to life and involves 101 the invocation of conscious response from the anima mundi or from the subconscious soul of all things, as well as from the human consciousness and from the world of superconscious contact. This ability develops steadily as the aspirant treads the path of discipleship. It is frequently prefaced in the earlier stages by much confusion, much astral psychism and frequent wrong interpretations. There is no need at this stage, however, for undue distress, because all that is needed is experience, and that experience is gained through experiment and its expression in the daily life. In no case is the truism of learning through a system of trial and error proved more correct than it is in the life and experience of the accepting disciple. When he is an accepted disciple, the errors decrease in number even though the trials, or the experimental use of the many varying energies, become more extensive and, therefore, cover a much wider range of activities. The processes of registration are founded upon what I might call invocative approaches from a wide area of possible contacts. The disciple has to learn to distinguish between these many impacts upon his sensitive aura. In the early stages, the majority of them are unconsciously registered, though the registration is acute and accurate. The goal, nevertheless, is conscious registration. This is brought about through the constant and steady holding of the attitude of the observer. It is developed through the attainment of detachment, the detachment of the observer from all desires and longings which concern the separated self. It will therefore be obvious to you that the use of the word observer involves the concept of duality and, therefore, of separation. In this case, however, the motive prompting observation is not self-interest, but the determination to clarify the aura so that it can register only 102. That which will be illuminating and related to the divine plan, which will be to the benefit of humanity and, therefore, to the creation of a new server within the ashrams of the hierarchy. The divisions made by certain psychologists of the consciousness of man into subconscious, conscious or self-conscious, and superconscious have a real measure of value here. It must be remembered, however, that the disciple, first of all, becomes a truly conscious unit of humanity and thus develops a true self-consciousness. This he arrives at by discriminating between the lower self and the higher self, and this renders his magnetic aura sensitive to an aspect of himself, which has not hitherto been a controlling factor. From that achieved point he begins to register impressions with increasing clarity and accuracy. Usually, in the early stages, the one desire of the disciple is to register impressions from the hierarchy. He much prefers that idea to the idea of registering impressions from his own soul or from the surrounding human factors, his fellowmen and the environment and the circumstances which they create. He longs for what might be called vertical impression. This motive, being very largely self-centeredness, turns the disciple introspectively in upon himself, and it is in this stage that many aspirants become prisoners, astrally speaking, because they register in their magnetic aura the many astrally motivated thought forms of what they believe and hope, vertical impression supposedly would convey. They contact with facility the astral counterparts of the higher worlds, which are reflected, and thereby distorted, into the astral plane. The world there registered is glamoured by wrong and selfish desires and by the wishful thinking of well-meaning devotees. Upon this I need not enlarge. All disciples at some point or another of their training have to work through this phase of glamour. In so doing they 103 clarify and intensify the magnetic aura and, simultaneously, clarify the surrounding astral world with which they are in contact. They learn also that the longing to register impressions from the hierarchy must give place to the determination to place their magnetic aura at the disposal of humanity. They then learn to register human need and to understand thereby where help is possible and their fellowmen can be served. By means of this conscious registration of invocative appeals from the world of horizontal contacts, the magnetic aura of the disciple is cleared of the hindering and engrossing thought forms, and from the aspirational desires and longings which have hitherto prevented right registration. The disciple then ceases to create them, and those which have been created die out or atrophy for lack of attention. Later on, when the accepting disciple becomes the accepted disciple and is permitted to participate in ashramic activity, he adds the ability to register hierarchical impression. This however is only possible after he has learnt to register impression coming to him from his own soul, the vertical impression, and from the surrounding world of men, the horizontal impression. When he has taken certain important initiations, his magnetic aura will be capable of registering impression from the subhuman kingdoms in nature. Again, later on, when he is a master of the wisdom and, therefore, a full member of the fifth kingdom in nature, the world of hierarchical life and activity will be the world from which horizontal impression will be made upon his magnetic aura, and vertical impression will come from the higher levels of the spiritual triad and, still later, from Shambhala. Then the world of humanity will be to him what the subhuman kingdoms were when the fourth kingdom, the human, was the field of his registered horizontal impression. 104. You have here the true significance of the cross of humanity clearly revealed. The fact of registration is no unusual phenomenon. Sensitive people are constantly being impressed from some level of consciousness or other, and are receptive to these impressions according to the level of consciousness upon which they normally function. Mediums, for instance, are exceedingly prone to receive impressions from etheric or astral levels, as are the vast majority of astral psychics, and their name is legion. Impressions from mental levels, concrete, abstract or of a more exalted nature, make their impress upon the minds of those who have attained a true measure of focus upon the mental plane. Scientists, mystics, mathematicians, occult students, aspirants and disciples, educators and humanitarians and all who love their fellowmen are all susceptible to such impression, and one of the outstanding needs of the disciple is to develop adequate sensitivity to ashramic impression and contact. Then he moves out of the group of mental sensitives listed above. The problem with which I now deal is far deeper and concerns the interpretation and the clear and correct recording of the impression, which is a far more difficult matter. The subject who is impressed must know the source of the impression. He must be able to relate it to some field of demanded information, correction, instruction, or energy distribution. He must be able to state clearly on what aspect of his recording mechanism, the mind, the astral body, the energy body, or the brain, the imparted and registered impression has made impact. One of the difficulties, for instance, facing the aspiring disciple and the earnest occult student is to record directly in the brain impressions from the spiritual triad, and later from the monad, via the antakarana. 105. This impression must be a direct descent from mental levels to the brain, avoiding all contact with the astral body. Only insofar as this direct descent is attained will the recorded impression be devoid of error. It will not then be tinctured with any emotional complex whatsoever, for it is the astral level of consciousness which is the great distorter of essential truth. Impressions from the ashram or from the spiritual triad, which are the only type of impressions with which I am here concerned, pass through three stages. 1. The stage of mental recording. The clarity and the accuracy of this recording will be dependent upon the condition of the channel of reception, the antakarana. In this recording, curiously enough, a certain element of time enters in. It is not time as you know it upon the physical plane, which is but the registration by the brain of passing events, it is the higher mental correspondence to time. Into this, I cannot here enter as the theme is too abstruse. For time, in this connection, is related to distance, to descent, to focus, and to the power to record. 2. The stage of brain reception. The accuracy of this reception will be dependent upon the quality of the physical brain cells, upon the polarization of the thinking man in the head center, and the freedom of the brain cells from all emotional impression. The difficulty lies here, that the receiving aspirant or the focused thinker is always aware emotionally of the descent of the higher impression and of the consequent clarification of the theme of his thought. This must, however, be recorded by a perfectly quiescent astral vehicle, and therefore you will see one of the main objectives of true meditation. 106. 3. The stage of recognized interpretation. This is an exceedingly difficult phase. Interpretation is dependent upon many factors: the educational background, the point reached in evolution, the mystical or the occult approach of the disciple to the center of truth, his freedom from the lower psychism, his essential humility, which plays a major part in proper understanding, and his personality decentralization. In fact, the character in its entirety is involved in this important matter of correct interpretation. In this aspect of impression the subject of symbols must necessarily be involved. All impressions must necessarily be translated and interpreted in symbols, in word forms or in pictorial representations. These the aspirant cannot avoid, and it is in the word forms, which are, needless to point out, in the nature of symbols, that he is apt to go astray. They are the media through which the registered impression is conveyed to the brain consciousness, i.e., to the physical plane awareness of the disciple, thus making possible his useful comprehension of abstract ideas or of those aspects of the path which it is his duty to understand and teach. There is no need for me to elaborate this theme. The true disciple is ever aware of the possibility of error, of the intervention of psychic intrusions and distortions. He knows well that true and effective interpretation of the imparted impression is dependent largely upon the purity of the receiving channel and upon the freedom of his nature from all aspects of the lower psychism, a point oft forgotten. A thick veil of concrete thought forms can also distort the true interpretation, as can astral intervention. The teaching upon the path and the spiritual impression can be interfered with by glamour from the astral plane or by separate and 107 concrete ideas emanating from mental levels. In this case it can be truly said that the mind is the slayer of the real. There is a deep occult significance to the words, an open mind. It is as essential to correct interpretation as is freedom from glamour and the psychic expressions to be found upon the astral plane. Here again you can grasp the necessity of a factual alignment so that a direct channel is created, along which the impression, directed by some higher source than the personality, can descend into the brain. At first, this channel and alignment must be established between the brain and the soul. This will involve all the three aspects of the personality, the etheric body, the astral vehicle and the mind nature. Basically, this aligning process should be started and developed upon the probationary path and brought to a relatively high state of effectiveness upon the earlier stages of the path of discipleship. Later, as the disciple consciously creates the antikarana and becomes a functioning part of the ashram, he learns, whilst practicing alignment, to bypass, if I may use such a word, two aspects of himself which have hitherto been of major importance: the astral vehicle and the soul body or causal body. The astral body is thus bypassed before the fourth initiation, and the soul body before the fifth. The entire process of bypassing takes much time and must be worked at with intensity, first of all with the focus upon the emotional nature through conscious discrimination, and finally upon the soul nature under the inspiration of the spiritual triad which is eventually substituted for the soul. All this will take many incarnations. For the registration and the interpretation of the higher impressions is a basic occult science and takes much learning and application to perfect. As the two processes are slowly developed, the third stage automatically becomes increasingly effective. The 108 received and interpreted impression brings about fundamental changes in the life and the state of consciousness of the aspirant and, above all, in his orientation. He becomes an evocative and invocative center of energy. That which he has received through the medium of his aligning channel becomes a potent factor in invoking a fresh flood of higher impression. It also makes him evocative upon the physical plane, so that the magnetic aura which he has engendered becomes increasingly sensitive to these spiritual inflowing impressions, and also increasingly sensitive to that which he evokes from his surrounding physical environment and from humanity. He becomes a power station en rapport with the hierarchy and he receives and distributes, in response to the evocative call of humanity and human need, the energy received. He also becomes a receiver of light, and of spiritual illumination, and a distributor of light in the dark places of the world and into human hearts. He is, therefore, an invocative and evocative center for use by the hierarchy in the three worlds of human evolution.